Good afternoon and welcome to the local and indie author event at the Norwalk Public Library. If everyone could mute themselves, and then the authors will unmute as they speak, and at the end everybody can unmute and we'll have a Q&A for all of the authors. As we celebrate our indie and local authors in Connecticut, we're excited to have this opportunity to bring together our writing community and our readers for education, networking, workshops, and beyond. As there was a quote from Ernest Hemingway that I like: "There is no friend as loyal as a book." And being here in the library, I'm surrounded with thousands of friends. But of course, it's not only the books, it's the people as well. And this tradition has been a long history at the Norwalk Public Library. According to an article that we found in the Army and Navy Register, March 20th, 1915, which was 106 years ago, Miss Dotha Stone Pineo, who was the first librarian here at the Norwalk Public Library, and her assistant, Miss Margaret Stevens Wilson, pioneered a library exhibit in a tremendously successful civic and industrial exposition, which was held in the local armory. The display of stories was attached to a tiny little booklet. It was a collection of volumes written or illustrated by Norwalk folk. It was entitled Our Own Authors. We strive to present our 2021 version in our booklet. We're so pleased to welcome all of you here today. And I see Katie has arrived, so we're all set. And Katie Carroll will be the first author. Award-winning author Katie L Carroll began writing after her 16-year-old sister, Kylene, unexpectedly passed away. Since then, writing has taken her to many wonderful places, both real and imagined. She wrote her YA fantasy, Elixir Bound, winner of the 2019 Connecticut Author Project for Best YA, and its sequel, Elixir Saved, so Kylene could live on in the pages of the book. Katie's middle grade adventure, Pirate Island, was selected by the Milford Public Library as the 2018 One City, One Story middle grade read. And she is also the author of the picture book, The Bedtime Night, illustrated by Erica Baird. She teaches writing and publishing workshops for children and adults and works as a freelance writer. So I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Katie Carroll. Katie?
Hi, thank you for having me. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm really happy to be celebrating Indie Author Day this year with the Norwalk Public Library again. I've been doing this, I think, since the first year that the Norwalk Public Library has been doing it. And I think it's just gotten better every year. And I'm looking forward to sharing my picture book, The Bedtime Night, today with you all. And hopefully maybe getting back in person next year. I know we said that last year too, but fingers crossed that'll happen. So The Bedtime Night is my first picture book. It's illustrated by Erica Baird. And this one has an interesting journey to publication. Originally, it was, I entered it in a contest and it didn't win the contest, but the company offered me a publication. And it was a picture book ebook app. And I don't remember what year it came out, but it was quite a few years ago. And I had originally conceived it as human characters, and they sent me a few sample sort of sketches that the illustrator had come up with the idea of making the characters mice, which was really adorable. And they were just kind of like, "Is that okay with you?" And I was like, yeah, because I think the wonderful thing about picture books is the illustrator helps tell the story and they bring their own vision to it. So where I had no idea of thinking of these characters as animals, the illustrator did. And she included some really cool elements. So that came out. And then that company, so it was as an ebook only. And that company eventually got bought out by another company. And I didn't really care for the terms of the new contract. So I decided to just take my rights back. And then it kind of sat there for a long time. And I was out on a hike with my sister and her kids. We have kids all about the same age. So my kids are 4, 7, and 10, and hers are all about the same age too. And she was like, whatever happened with the Bedtime Night? And she goes, I always love that story. And I was like, yeah, it's just out of publication right now. And I've thought about doing something with it, but I always got a lot of other new projects going on. So it's kind of sometimes hard to go back and focus on old things. So I had kind of been thinking about, oh, maybe I should do something with it. So that kind of spurred me on, and I contacted the illustrator and I was like, hey, could I, buy the rights to use your illustrations and put it out in a print form? And we came to an agreement, and that worked very well for both of us. And then I made it into a book. And this book was a little bit of a challenge. It was my first picture book, and I basically had to design the whole thing. So the app was, I'll show you one page. More like this, where there's the text on one side and the picture on the other. And that's how every page was. And that doesn't really work for a traditional print picture book. So I had to kind of take the illustrations that the illustrator had created and figure out a way to make it work in a picture book form in print. So that kind of stretched my skills a lot. And it was fun to do. It took me longer than I expected, as most things in this business do. But I'm really happy with how it came out. And I've always loved the illustrations and the mood of this book. So I'm really happy that it came out in January of this year in paperback. And I also did it in ebook. And I'm hoping next year to do a hardcover version. That would be really fun, because I think picture books, it's fun to kind of have that hardcover, little sturdier version of the picture book. So I think I'm going to read from it. And so the Bedtime Night, the idea came to me. I have a really overactive imagination, and I kind of see things in the shadows and the dark, even as an adult, and certainly as a child. So I was kind of like thinking of this idea of empowerment. And our fears often are sort of in our heads, and taking that idea of what's in your head and making it, first of all, seeing it for what it really is. And that makes it a little less scary. And then what if we flipped it around and turned it into something fun and imaginative? So that was kind of the concept behind creating the Bedtime Night. So we have our daddy night mouse and our little girl mouse. When my nightlight blinks out, the shadows rise. They creep and crawl and sneak and slink to my bed. I'm scared of the dark. Daddy Night charges in to rescue me. I kept some of the original formatting. You could see Daddy Night with his robe is, his armor, and his little flashlight, which actually is like a Christmas light bulb. And again, this is all stuff that the illustrator brings to the table here when we're talking about illustrations. His bathrobe is a knight's armor. His flashlight is a sharp sword. A giant stomps, and fee fi fo fum is on the ceiling. Oh, I scream. You could see the giant there. And then let's see. Daddy points his sword and the giant is gone. And then in the next part of this spread, you could see it's really just a ceiling fan. And now Daddy's going to encourage her to turn it into something else. You know what I see, Daddy asks. A friendly sea creature. It has 5 arms and looks like something in the night sky. Oh, I say, I see it now. I'm not so scared anymore. And when I do a read aloud, which admittedly I haven't been able to do many with children, I always ask them, what do you think they're going to be seeing? I don't show the picture yet, because I thought that was a really fun aspect of this book. And they see a sea star. So they took the shadow, which looked like a giant, but turned out to be a ceiling fan, and then they turn it into the sea star or the starfish, depending on what your terminology is. Then a witch cackles in the corner. She tilts her spiky hat to cast a spell. Stop her, I scream. Daddy rattles his armor and points his sword. Let's say where we have our witch in the shadows. And oh, it's really just a dollhouse, a castle. Let's see what we turn it into. That's not a witch, Daddy says. It's something much bigger, way off in the distance. Maybe we can climb it someday. Do you see how it's capped with snow? Oh, I say, I see it now. I'm not so scared anymore. I think we can guess what we're turning it into. a mountain there in the background. Until a giant spider scuttles down the bedroom wall. Daddy points his sword. Here's our giant spider shadow. We see it's really just one of those funky lamps. What else could it be, Daddy asks. Think of something that has willowy branches and green leaves. Oh, I say, I see it. We can have a picnic under it. I'm not so scared anymore. We have our tree here now instead. Another thing I did with the girl character, well, the mouse girl, I guess, I had her become a little more active each round, sort of each episode of seeing a shadow, and her kind of take control on her own. And eventually we'll see at the end what she can do. But the shadows keep bumping and thumping in the dark. A snake slithers and slips out of the closet. Here's our snake. And I don't know if you've noticed, because it's a little hard to see on the screen, but there's actually human characters sort of in the shadows, acting out the same story as our mice characters. Again, another layer to the story. There's so many layers to picture books, the more you read them. And this is, again, something the illustrator brings, which just was so impressive to me, the layers she added. Daddy wraps me in his armor and hands me the sword. I pointed at the snake. Imagine it's something else, Daddy says. So you see our snake is really just a towel, right? Let's see what she imagines. Oh, but first I think and think, I think. So this was a page that originally looked more like this, which is our next page. And I really wanted a close-up of our girl, our mouse here. So this was a design element that I added, where I did a close-up with that I think and think and think. Let's see what she thinks, which you've got a sneak peek of here. Aha, I shout. It's a toy. I can swing it over my head and jump when it comes back down. Do you see it, Daddy? I do, he says. I'm not so scared anymore. So now you can see what she was thinking there. Daddy kisses me goodnight and leaves me with the armor and sword. Shadows creep and crawl and sneak and slither. Here she is in bed. Again, another one I kind of zoomed in a little to get more of a spread here. Huge rats scamper across the rug. I shriek and shut my eyes tight. I love this spread too. I don't know how well you can see it here. She's got the robe on and the flashlight, and you can see the rats. I pull the armor tighter around me, point my sword, and open my eyes. I laugh because I'm not so scared anymore. See, now she's doing it all by herself here. She sees it's really just shoes, not rats. I imagine the shadows are something else. They have blue feathers and chirp me a lullaby. Do you see them? That last line, I kind of break that fourth wall there, sort of challenge the child reader to maybe try the same thing at home. See that she imagines they're birds. So that's the Bedtime Night. There's the back, just a little blurb there. I think I'll pass the torch on now for ready and let someone else go. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That was very cute. Our next author is Carol Ann Moletti. Carol Ann Moletti lives and works as a nurse midwife in New York City, thus explaining her fascination with all things paranormal, urban fantasy, and space opera. Her nonfiction focuses on healthcare, politics, and women's issues, but her first love is writing science fiction and fantasy because walking through walls is less painful than running into them. Carol's Cape Cod Paranormal Unfinished Business series of novels have been published by Soulmate. Her short stories have been featured in several of the 10 Tales fantasy anthologies, and her darker fiction has appeared in the Hell's Kitties, Hell's Heart, and Hell's Mall anthologies. Boulevard of Bad Spells and Broken Dreams, an urban fantasy novel set in the Bronx, New York, is under contract with Champagne Books, due out next year. Carol won the Oasis Journal 2009 prize for best nonfiction, and 2 timely pieces of her memoir have been published in the acclaimed Shifts and Impact anthologies. So please join me in welcoming Carol Ann Moletti.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. I echo Katie's wish that hopefully we can be all together one place next year. But thank you, Cindy, for all the work you do to keep us all connected and to keep this event going. It's just one of my favorite things to do every year, to meet new authors and see old friends. So I was looking at this list of interview questions and trying to pick out the ones that I wanted to sort of focus on. I think I'm going to switch to talking about some of my nonfiction, because this has been a year for me, a year and a half actually, that has immersed me in my work more than I ever imagined it could be. And it has been an extremely, I think, the most difficult 2 years of my entire career in the inner city in the middle of COVID. Right now, I am working in homeless shelters, doing vaccines in homeless shelters with the teams. And also, most recently, we're going around to the city public schools and vaccinating the younger children. But I was working in the hospital when COVID hit. So there's a lot of pain and trauma there. And I think that some of the writing that I've been doing most recently is some of the most raw and deep writing I've ever done in terms of nonfiction. I think I'm getting to the point where I feel like I've arrived. I've gotten to that point. Which is kind of a nice sense, and it's an escape for me to be able to write through that and get the emotions down on paper. Still not quite sure what I'm going to do with it all, but in terms of how did I get started with this is in terms of my nonfiction and fiction as well, because my fiction is very, very based on experiences I have that I sort of fix it in a fantasy world. I actually took my he was a preteen son and 10 of his friends to see a movie for his birthday. And it was a kid's movie. And I'm not going to mention what movie it is, but and in that movie, there was a scene of domestic violence. And I was like shocked by it. And the thing that struck me was that the kids that were with me, and these are all like 8, 9-year-old boys, they were like, "Oh my God, that's terrible." Like they reacted to that. And I was like thankful that they reacted to that. But I went home after I had never really written creatively before that. And my son is now 30, so it's a while ago. And I went home and I said, I'm going to write a novel that addresses this. And I did, and it's terrible. But it got me into that setting of how to write through the anger that I feel sometimes and the frustration that I feel. So that's how I started writing. And it's been about, 29 years that I've been writing. Now, the latest 2 pieces of nonfiction that I've published, one was it's a prose poem about it's called I Will Sleep No More Tonight. It's about a mother realizing her children are growing up, so it's sort of in that vein. And then the most recent is in the Impact anthology, which is women's stories of resistance, and that was published probably, I think it was 2019. So we were in the middle of a real crisis for women's rights and for a lot of the country. And again, that to date had been the most, I think, emotional and impactful. And I wrote about healthcare. It was healthcare. Most of my writing does have a healthcare bent in it. And it's both of the anthologies have been nominated, and I think won several book awards. So I'm really happy to be in that. So I think I'm taking, processing all of the last 2 years and focusing on actually pulling my entire memoir together, which starts at the beginning of my career and goes to now the end of my career, and reworking it so that I can publish it. And I think that what's happened since I started writing it will be altered and informed by where I'm winding up at this point. So that's what I'm doing. And if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to ask, I'd be happy to answer about writing process, how one gets into writing, where you learn to write, things like that.
Thank you, Carol. And we'll do the Q&A at the end of all of the presentations. But thank you. And I have some questions for you, but I'm going to save them to the end.
Okay.
Our next author is Arjun Shidduri. Arjun Shidduri was born in Calcutta, India, to Bengali parents who moved around undivided India to places like Lahore, Bombay, and Gorakhpur until finally settling in Calcutta. There he learned to live and work and developed a lasting love for poetry and the theater. After graduating from Calcutta University, he spent some time working in the Indonesian archipelago, visiting far-flung islands and facing some scary situations. He went on to higher studies in the US and became a college professor. He lives in Norwalk with his wife and 2 dogs and hugely misses O. Henry, who now runs with the Wolves. I was a little curious. Anyway, I'd like to welcome Arjun Shidduri, and he can tell us about his memoir, The Boy Who Ate 30 Lunches.
Hi, everybody. I'm Arjun Shidduri, and some of the characters that she mentioned are in the collection of short stories that I wrote, O. Henry being my old dog. And the collection is called Arjun Shidduri's The Boy Who Ate 30 Lunches. And yes, that's me at the age of 7. And now I'm 70, so that was a long time ago. The secondary title of this book is The Boy Who Ate 30 Lunches and Other shorter, even shorter stories about coming of age in Calcutta and beyond. So it is, as Carol said, my memoir is in some kind of short story form, but with pictures. And the pictures actually came out well. I think Amazon did a good job with them. Okay. So these are some pictures of my time in the theater, about which I wrote a short pan about a friend of mine who passed away recently and all the plays he was in. Anyway, to begin in the beginning, how did I decide to do this? I have another book, but it's an academic book about marketing and consumer behavior called Emotion and Reason in Consumer Behavior. But this is my first fun book, if you like. I decided to do that. I was at a dinner party and people were telling stories around the table. My wife said, tell them about the silver cup. And she had heard this story from me before. So I told the story about how when I was a very young boy, probably at this age of 7 or so, I'm not sure exactly when, but I had a manservant, not I, the whole family. And servants in India are not slaves, first thing. So that people have to understand, and people in America think that when I say servants, no, they're not bonded with us. They have salaries, they can leave anytime they like, they have board, lodging, and they have leave. They're not paid as well as they should be, but then money is an issue in middle-class families too in Calcutta. But so I had this wonderful person I still remember called Ramesh, and Ramesh used to look after me and do all the household work at the same time. And there was this silver cup, which I've kept all these years, actually. And he used to give me the milk every morning in this silver cup. And then he was fired by my father for some reason. Maybe I'll read some of the story to you. And then some weeks later, we came back to the house to find the whole house had been burglarized. They had stolen everything from the house except the heavy furniture. But the one thing that was still in the china closet was the silver cup. He had not had the heart to take that with him. So that's what started me. And everybody around the table said, you should write that up as a story. And I said, okay, let me try. And so that was the first story I wrote. And that's how it came about. And after I wrote that with my wife's help, I don't know, she might be here somewhere. Her name is Kathleen. She really encouraged me to write the other stories. And the Silver Cup was going to be the first title. And then I got this picture from my sister. This is what you look like when you were 7 years old with the Silver Cup. So I said, well, that may be a better picture than just showing this raggedy old cup in the front. So I changed the picture and I changed the name of the book to The Boy Who Ate 30 Lunches. And that's also me, and I'll read something about that. But just to finish off, what I was talking about is to how it started. And well, that's the continuation of how it started. And then there's the first story, which I really don't remember. So, you know, when you write your memoirs about when you were 2 years old, you can't count on your memories, you count on the stories you were told. So my stories that were told by my sister, my mother, one of them was about the ink pot. And so that became the first. So I went in chronological order when I was like probably 2 years old. I had no memory of this. And the first story in the collection is The Inkpot. It's about snakes in Gorakhpur. The second story is The Boy Who Ate 30 Lunches. And I'll just read out some of the dialogue in that Boy Who Ate 30 Lunches, but might explain what that's about. Later that evening, my mother picked up the black rotary phone. In those days, we had rotary phones in our living room and heard the shrill voice of Miss B. Hartley, who was our school principal. It was kindergarten. Good evening. Could you please make 30 lunches and send them to the school by 11 o'clock tomorrow? Your son has been eating everybody else's lunches, and now you should pay them back. But I send him off the full lunch every day, Miss Hartley. Why would he eat somebody else's food? I know you do, Mrs. Chowdhury, but he still takes somebody else's lunch, and all the other parents are complaining to me. But how can I make 30 tiffin boxes by 11 o'clock, madam? Well, I guess you'll just have to get up early, my dear. Click. What have you done? Why are you stealing food? What am I supposed to do with you? Very soon I'm sent to another school and quickly expelled for biting a shy little girl on the cheek. Oh, but I was a naughty lad. Everyone knows everybody else in our social circle. My parents take me to a party where the shy little girl sees me and screams blue murder to her parents. My father slaps me for embarrassing him. Fear, anger, sorrow. One last chance, and my mother, in utter desperation, takes me to see Father Picacci, the future Archbishop of our city. Father Picacci later became spiritual advisor to Mother Teresa, and he became a cardinal, and he helped elect 2 popes. So I met him when he was the headmaster of the boys' school in St. Xavier's, Calcutta. He's the headmaster of a boys' Jesuit school that is very prestigious. We don't have a Hope, Ma. He's wearing a white cassock with big cloth buttons and heavy black shoes, red face, blue eyes, and a kind smile which shines through to me. Father, save my son, for he is the devil. So you like to fight, eh? I'll fight you, springing up on his table so I can get a better look at him. Unafraid now, ready for anything, regardless of the consequences. Bring it on. I'm here, 5 years old. I like his spirit. We'll take the rascal. And that's how Father Picacci saved my life, as far as my mother was concerned. So, and then there's the Silver Cup. You know, come back to that when I talk about some advice for writing short stories that I found to be very useful. The fourth story is about coming of age. It's called The Pigeon. It's really about how young boys in a different culture learn the facts of life. It's very different from my mother and father never gave me the talk, as Americans get. We're told by other boys what happens. The Bridge Master and his wife, which is about my neighbor, it's a funny story about a very quiet man who becomes somebody quite different when his wife leaves the house. Romeo, which is my first love. Queen, my first dog. And in Queen, at the end, I bring in my old dog here in America, O. Henry, who's had a second life as if he was the first dog I had, Ronnie. Ronnie is reborn. In India, we believe in reincarnation. So for dogs too, why not? And so that's what O. Henry refers to. Not the short story writer. O. Henry was a dog that I had named O. Henry because I gave it to my wife, that I was fond of short stories. And O. Henry wrote this short story about the gift of the Magi, which I sarcastically said is really talking about useless gifts being given to people. And so when I gave her, I said, here's a useless gift, a dog called O. Henry. But actually it turned out to get my heart and everybody's heart. And then there's one about a professor of mine in English, The Spring and the Man. And there's a story about, as I said, my old friend in the theater, who I give another name to, Julian Huxley. And then there's one about a fruit seller, Palwala's Favor, and how I and the fruit seller had a relationship which was mutually beneficial to both of us. And then there's a ghost story, The Mysterious Affair at Stages. And that's partly true, partly fiction. Because I really have never met a ghost in my life, but I thought I'd create one. Man of Destiny is about my exploits in Indonesia. As Carol said, I've been to Indonesia and worked for 2 years as a marketing manager there. So what I discovered about differences in culture, though India and Indonesia are separated by maybe 1,000 miles, if you look at the tip of Indonesia. So that's an interesting story from a marketing and cultural point of view. I give it to my marketing students at Fairfield University to read, and they seem to appreciate it. And Reprieve for Baby, which is set here in America, here in Newark, New Jersey. And it's about a goat, a little baby goat who gets to live another day, maybe. So it's called Reprieve for Baby. And finally, the last little shorter, even shorter page is only one page, called Time and Place. And the remarkable thing about that is that I was born on the 6th of June, 1951, which is India would be written as 06085-1. And I live in a zip code that is 06851. And that was a remarkable coincidence that it echoes, except for 10, is the exact same digits of the digits of my birth. So even with 10 missing, it boggles the mind, it beggars belief. A mere coincidence, a random event, or do time and place merge like this? And everything comes full circle. Do we mostly reap what we sow? Do the stars finally align? Then there must be a wise providence for all of us. Make of it what you will, and just live, love, and lust like there is a tomorrow. So all my stories, actually, I try to bring them, I find a counterpart in the present or in the more recent years from the old years. And so everything swings back. Like in The Silver Cup, which is the main motivation for this whole collection. Many years later, my wife brought back Ramesh to me when I was in a hospital in Paris. And though he wasn't Ramesh, but I thought he was, and that helped me get through that part of my life. So everything comes back full circle is one of the themes running through the book. Do I have a little more time, Carol, or do I have a couple of minutes more? Or?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, about writing short stories, I found a framework with an acronym, which I found to be useful, and that's the CLAMPS framework. C for character, L for location, A for action, M for message, P for plot, and S. Guess what S is? Surprise. And so I found that to be useful. Another useful framework or useful book actually is by George Sanders. If anybody wants to write short stories, it's called A Swim in the Pond. That's with George Sanders, and he gives short stories by Tolstoy and Chekhov, and it's a wonderful way to approach short stories. But I found the CLAMS framework, in short, with the acronym, very useful. Like the characters and how you create characters. They're one of the most difficult things to create the character, I think. I was an English major, so I started writing and I gave it up to go to Indonesia, make some money, and became a marketing professor. So I haven't kept up with writing stories of any kind, but now I'm coming back in my old age to write stories. But creating characters I found is difficult, especially in a short story. How do you develop a character within 10, 15 pages? So you have to be sketchy. In the Silver Cup, if I can read a little bit more from there, one of my earliest memories is burned into my mind like a brilliant tableau, haunting and terrible. It is night and our servant Ramesh is crouching on the marble floor of our old Calcutta house, picking up the pieces of a broken vase. So there's Ramesh, character number 1. His frightened eyes dart to where my father, character number 2, stands. My father hovers over him like some dark and dreadful avenger, his rage flowing through every muscle in his body. At the other end of the long, heavily draped living room, a young boy, number 3, that's me, stricken with conscience and fear, hides his face in his mother's lap. So you have 4 characters quickly set up. But as you can see, they're very sketchy. But they're integral to the whole plot of the story. She looks at him with the compassion of an angel who must stand by and allow mere mortals to choose their own destiny. But that's not all my mother was, not just an angel who watched others fulfill their destiny. She had her own comic characters and features. There's another story here called Palwala. My mother runs through most of the stories as a background. She's always a constant character in the lab. She used to send me downstairs when we lived in a 4-story apartment to go to the fruit cellar about 4 times a day to get the fruit for lunch, for breakfast, for dinner. And once I asked her, so why do you make me do this? Why don't you just tell me once in the morning what food we want for the whole day? And she said, she didn't know what to say, but she came back to the room and she said, and what if there was an earthquake and the house went down? She never thought about it. But so she had those little quirks too. She wasn't just an angel. She was a human character, but it's very difficult to create a character. Again, location, right? CLAMPS. Location is also very difficult to do in short story. How do you summon up a location in just a few pages and keep it as a constant background in the story? So I was thinking about Dickens and David Copperfield a lot when I wrote the location for the Silver Cup. Memories of the quiet of the afternoon heat and the click of the garden gate as Ramesh left the house to mix with the louts across the street. This is memories of tea and laughter in our garden under the tree from which the frangipani fell, and the silence of the house when somebody close to us died, and the fragile white flowers lay crushed under our feet. So you have to, with a few broad strokes, draw the location and hope that it works and people get the idea. CLA is action. And so you've got to keep it moving. Having introduced Ramesh and the 4 characters, and then Ramesh getting fired for something he didn't actually do, which I did. And then given a little bit about the location, I have to keep the action going in the story. So I remember coming back with my parents and sisters on a dark night to an empty house with all the lights turned off. I remember my father growling at the police that he was a high-level government official that would be held to pay if the inspector did not find the bastards who had taken everything. My mother holding my sisters and me tightly together, the police inspector approaching my father and asking him if he had any idea why the crooks had left an expensive trinket behind in an otherwise empty china closet. There it was, my silver cup, resting alone in a desolate space, shorn of all the rosewood china, but with the faithful servant's love written all over it. So keeping the thing moving is important, even in a short story. There's not much space to do it in, but and message, I guess the message of the story is that sometimes love gets in the way of your own self-interest. I mean, I think Ramesh knew that he left that trinket there, that it would be traced back to him, and he would be caught as a thief. But I don't think he had a choice. That emotion sometimes rules over your own rationality and your own self-interest, if there is a message at all. And the plot, they say a plot should have an ascendo, a crescendo, and a descendo, and that's there in the story. It sort of rises and then falls and then comes back. And the surprise at the end is that that he had left the Silver Cup. So that surprise, I think, is important in a short story too. And George Sanders in the Chekhov and Tolstoy stories has some surprises that we don't expect. So that's it from me. It's all the advice I can give somebody who wants to write short stories. It's worth doing, though, because you don't have to think of the whole long book, to write a short story. And it's easier to do it when you have, hard facts and you know where you're going to go. When you're writing your memoirs, it's easier that way because you know what the facts were. But if you're really creating short stories like O. Henry did, of course, that's, genius. And I'm no genius, but I'm trying.
Thank you so much, Arjun. Our next author is Renis F. Lotta. Renis Felicia Lotta is CEO of New Levels LLC, a firm designed to help develop, equip, and empower men and women to pursue a purpose-driven life. Renis spent 26 years in various accounting positions within GE Capital before shifting her talents to entrepreneurship. Passionate about helping others obtain greater fulfillment and authentic success in their next acts. New Levels supports individuals on their journey from jobs and stifled careers to living in purpose prosperity. This is the state of moving from surviving to thriving as the person each one of us was created to be. Renis was inspired during a hiatus to write her debut book, The Layover, Devotionals for When You're Between Where You Were and Where You're Going. It was released in January 2020 by Trinity Broadcast Network. Renis is married to her husband, Lenwood Lotta, of 25 years, and mother to son, Jalen, and daughter, Jordan. So please join me in welcoming Renis Lotta.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cindy, I first want to thank you for the invitation to be with you all again. I count it a privilege to be in your company. And I also want to thank you, Cindy, for widening the invitation this year and allowing the authors to come into the library to sell our books. I had the privilege yesterday of sitting with Laurel Peterson, who was on earlier this morning. And so it was very nice to meet another author in person and to meet some of the people who were coming in and out of the library. And so I'll jump into what I want to talk about. I consider myself to be an accountant turned author. And I had to lean into my faith in order to navigate a season of uncertainty after I was, like I like to call, released from a company I have been with for 26 years. And so what I want to do is read the introduction of my book, and then I'll give some detail and offer some additional commentary in regards to my book. So my debut book was published on January 7th of 2020. And as she said, it's called The Layover, Devotionals for When You're Between Where You Were and Where You're Going. And this book is basically filled with inspiring, faith-building stories about the restorative and transformative power of God. My journey was very much a spiritual one, but it was also filled with a lot of practical tips. But here is the introduction to The Layover. This book was initially written out of personal frustration as I walked with God during a very difficult season of loss. I was bound by disappointment, stuck on a lonely road between where I used to be and where I was being called to. What started as periodic journaling quickly turned into a collection of devotional writings. Documenting my journey got me through the agonizing moments when my mind and heart were at complete odds. Writing offered the temporary relief that I desperately needed. It was the glue that held my broken pieces together. It gave me purpose. It gave me vision. It gave me hope. These devotionals are intended to encourage those who struggle with loss that has occurred unexpectedly or unnecessarily due to no fault of their own. Such losses are usually the result of the physical death of someone precious or the natural end of someone dear. In my particular case, loss came in the form of a layoff from a world-renowned company that I've been a part of for almost 3 decades. Sometimes the aftermath of loss is so devastating that it can cause us to lose our way. Therefore, how we choose to push past the pain is of the utmost importance. Fervent prayer helped me to navigate the waves of grief. Restoration would eventually come, but in the meantime, I had to figure out how to move towards my destiny. I refer to this interim period as the layover because I was forced to wait for what felt like forever on a divine connection in an uncomfortable and unfamiliar space. It wasn't obvious at the time, but it is now. God, in his great mercy, allotted me time to reconcile my loss with his sovereignty. It was a long and arduous task, but he brought me safely through. I wouldn't take anything for my journey now, for what I have gained in Christ has far outweighed what I have lost. I have learned how to completely lean and depend on Jesus. Now is my sincere prayer to inspire others to do the same. And that was the beginning of my writing journey as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the next stage or the next chapter of my life. And I think it was Carol who had mentioned earlier about the pain and trauma that's been going on the past couple of years. And I think many of us can attest to all that has occurred unexpectedly with the pandemic. It just turns out that my book was published just before the pandemic. And there are so many people who have been since that time in transition, not just in transition from loss of a job, like was my case, but so much loss and devastation, dealing with trauma of loss of people. And as I began doing my talks, as a result of becoming an author, I started getting these invitations to speak in various places. And I met so many people and continue to do so who are in transition in so many different ways. I meet empty nesters. You know, I'm meeting people who are having to learn how to live without their loved ones, and people who, just so many different ways that people are in transition. And I don't know how many of you have heard this thing called the Great Resignation, but there are a lot of people who in this space now who have decided that they no longer want to do the work that they once did. People like me want to do more meaningful and more fulfilling work, more purposeful work. And so I feel as though, and I have come to really know that my release from my company was just a setup in some ways in order to push me into my divine purpose, which I consider to be an encourager and to help people become their best selves. I know for me, these past few years that I've been in transition, I have learned many practical ways in order to do what I believe is helping me to become who I have been created to be, like moving out of my comfort zone. That's not always an easy thing to do, but I've learned how to move out of my comfort zone and how to be vulnerable. That's another thing that's not easy to do. But when you have been laid off from a job, particularly a job where you have been your entire career, and you're in some ways being forced to reinvent yourself, that's a vulnerable space where you have to ask for help. Can you all relate to that? Anyone relate to that? Yeah. And so that is where I have been, and also the self-discovery that one goes through when you're in a space of indecision and uncertainty and trying to figure out what steps to take next. And so for me, my gifts, we all have them. We don't always use them, but my gift turned out to be writing and speaking and encouraging others. And so that is what the layover has done for me and what it's doing for so many others. And I'm grateful to be used as a vessel of good in order to help people see the best in themselves. And I want to also mention a second book that I was blessed to be a part of, an anthology with 6 women. This book was published in May of this year, and it's called Trusting God in the Unknown, Stories of Faith and Triumph. So continues with the same theme of how to respond in a crisis situation and how to move forward in a positive light. Trying to think of what else I would like to add. Writing for me, how I got started with writing was, it was like journaling for me. It was just very therapeutic. And I started writing and I couldn't stop. And I haven't stopped until this very day. I continue to write on a daily basis. In fact, I have something called a dose of the day, which is a daily posting that I do on Instagram and Facebook in order to encourage people with a word. I also have a YouTube channel that I started because the layover is just taking on new forms. I have created the YouTube channel because I'm in the process of creating an audiobook where I'm narrating my stories. I'm narrating devotionals and I put music behind it. So I have found myself in places I never would have imagined. Never would have imagined myself being in a recording studio, writing a book. Never would have imagined that I would have a book in the library. Never would have imagined that that my book would now be sold in airports. It's being sold at JFK now, which was a dream of mine. If you can see the cover is a person standing in the airport in a layover. And now the book is being sold on airports. Never would imagine that the book would be on an international commercial that is showed daily on Trinity Broadcast Network. So I'm going to wrap up just by saying that sometimes when we suffer loss, or most times when we suffer loss of any kind, it doesn't feel good, but sometimes it does work out for our good.
Thank you, Renis. That was lovely. Our next author, Aaliyah Zobel Nolan, is the author of over 150 traditionally published titles. Her books reflect her two main passions, God and cats. Recent titles include Cat Confessions, a Kitty Come Clean tell-all book, winner of the Evangelical Christian Book Publishers Association Bronze Award for selling over 100,000 copies. Whatever is Lovely, a 90-day devotional and journal in English and Spanish. Why a Cat is Still Better Than a Man, illustrated by Nicole Hollander. The Worrywart's Prayer Book. Laugh Out Loud, 40 Women Humorists Celebrate Then and Now Before We Forget, a winner of the 2019 Indie Book Award for Humor. The classic best-selling children's book, What I Like About a Book About Difference, What I Like About Me, a book about differences, named one of the top 5 books on children's body image by Forbes, and the sequel, What I Like About You, a book about acceptance, which won a 2020 Indie Book Award for children's picture books. Her newest title, God Made Us Just Right, from Kriegel Publishers, was published in February 2021. So please join me in welcoming Aaliyah Zobel Nolan.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh,
Yes,
hello.
we can hear you.
Hello.
Can you hear us? Are you,
No, I guess not.
Aaliyah?
Stop video. Mute.
Aaliyah?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. You can't hear us? Are you frozen? do you want to go out and come back in? Okay, while we're waiting for Aaliyah to go out and come back in, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to speak to our other authors about or share or any information, please feel free to unmute yourself and to join in.
I would like to just jump in. Someone asked a question about where they can purchase my book. It is available online wherever books are sold. It's also available at your local Barnes and Nobles, at least in Stamford and Danbury.
Thank you. And we have one of the things we have in the in our booklet is we've got the QR code for people to scan the code to visit the different authors' websites. And if anyone needs any information on where to purchase the books, I can always let the authors know, and we can post that as well on our website.
Absolutely. And I have a website as well, www.newlevelswithrenis.com, where you can purchase the book as well.
I'm not seeing Aaliyah getting back in, but we'll wait and you know. Oh yes, someone asked, will these books also be available at the Norwalk Library? Yes, they are. Yes, all of the books written by the authors that we have had in our presentations in the past 2 days will definitely, if they're not already available in our collection, they will be. Yes, we have them on order.
That is so awesome, Cindy. Thank you so much for how much you support local authors. It's amazing how much support you and your team throw behind us.
Well, we're a team. The library couldn't be the library without having the books written by authors, and our local community and people in Connecticut and all around the local area are very important to us. And for those of you who, we do a lot of author speak programs. Some of you have had programs here. We do them in person on a normal basis. We haven't in the past 2 years, but we've been doing them on Zoom. And anyone that's interested in doing any kind of a presentation, either when we get back to normal and do have in-library presentations or on Zoom, you can email me at clahey, CLAHEY @norwalkpl.org. I don't know what's happening with Aaliyah. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments for each other?
Actually, I had a question for you. I was just curious. What is an indie author?
Well, originally, I mean, this was an indie author event, but we
Indie as an
expanded it.
independent?
And it's an independent author.
Okay.
We include small independent publishers. We include self-published authors. We include people that are published by major publishers as well, small publishing companies, local publishing companies. So we broadened it because we think we're all they're all one community to us here at the Norwalk Public Library.
It's a great job you do. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's very important to us. It's and you know, as I've said over and over, it's been, we all talk about what's happened the past 18 months, but on March 13th, 2020, the library closed. We closed for 3 months. We reopened and did limited service by sidewalk service and answering reference questions, but people weren't allowed in the library. Then people were allowed in the library one at a time for an hour at a time to use computers in October of 2020. Then we were able to allow people to continue to come into the library. Now multiple people coming in, they can browse the shelves, check out books. The study rooms are being used, and small meeting rooms. And we're just waiting for the time when our auditorium will be open for more than vaccinations, because right now it's being used for vaccinations at some point. But please, if anybody has any questions for each of the authors.
Cindy, I saw on the website that you also do like a writer's workshop that's going on right now. You're at the end of it.
We do.
What do you talk about, or how does that work?
Yes, okay, Aaliyah's in the waiting room, so why don't we let her come in, and then I'll try to remember to get back to that.
Okay,
Okay, I'll circle back.
no problem.
Maybe I can talk about that while she's getting in. Yes, we do. We have our writing instructor, it's short story class right now, but our writing instructor's name is Kim Kovach, and it's Mondays from 10 to 12. And we're just finishing up the fall session. We have a couple more weeks left. Then we're going to take a hiatus and we'll resume again in January. We'll have, we posted on our website and we put it out on social media, and we send it in our e-newsletters. And to get our e-newsletters, you can go on our website. There's an area where you can sign up to get our e-newsletters, and it'll give you we do it from the adult services department. It comes out every week. So the first and third week of the month, it comes from adult services, comes from children's on the second, and it comes from the South Norwalk branch, I think, on the fourth. Anyway, we promote all of our programs and events, and we always list them on our website, norwalkpl.org, so you can find out all the information. Okay, she's back in the waiting room. Let's see if she can get in. I don't know if she's having a problem. Okay.
Hello. I'm
Okay,
back.
we introduced you. We're ready for you.
Okay, I have a very iffy connection here.
Uh-oh. Are you just connecting?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Hi, everybody. Finally, I have a very iffy computer, and it just, everybody came in loud and clear and so wonderful. And when it was my turn, it went, no internet connection, no internet connection. Oh my gosh. So anyway, I'm very happy to be here, and I wanted to thank Cindy, because she's always so great for us, during this whole pandemic and everything. She had these Zoom meetings and everything. And I hope you get a chance to go to the library, because you get this super, super bag, and it has all kinds of goodies in it. It had a beautiful picture of my book, one of my books, and I already put it up on the wall. So anyway, so nerve-wracking these things are, aren't they? So anyway, I just want to tell you what I've been doing over COVID. I had a book come out that was called God Made Us Just Right. And it came out just as the pandemic hit. And let's see if I can find it here. Okay, God Made Us Just Right. It's backwards, but this is and it's all about the animals complaining to their parents, why do I have a long nose, and why are my ears, puffy, and why do I have big feet, and things like that. And their parents explain to them why God made them like that for a reason, and explain the reason. So that book just came out, and there was absolutely no way to get anybody to see it or buy it, or social media was the only way, and I'm not really good with that. But anyway, we survived, and the book is now number 25 on Kriegel's list. Kriegel is my one of my publishers. It's a religious evangelical publisher. Then I decided, I did a book a while ago called 101 Reasons Why a Cat is Better Than a Man. Nothing personal, it's not male bashing, it's cat enhancing. That book sold 500,000 copies, and that was about, I want to say 15 years ago. So I decided, you know what, it's time for a reprise. So I'm not very good at formatting and technological things, as was just evidenced. And so I hired a friend of mine to help me, and we reprised the book. We did a different cover, and it's called Why a Cat is Still Better Than a Man. And it has wonderful illustrations by Nicole Hollander. Many of you will remember her from the Sylvia comic strip. And so we reprised it, and I actually did it myself. Can't see it. I did it with Amazon, and it was amazing how easy it was and how nicely it came out. It really came out quite nice, if I do say so myself. Then, here is God Made Us Just Right. It's a board book. I'll just show you maybe one of the drawings inside. The illustrator did a really nice job. And it's also good for body image, and I was very interested in the last speaker's devotional, because I also do devotionals. I loved her title, and I loved the tagline, and I know many, many people are in between. And I think I think it's the cosmos waking some people up. There are so many people who do these things on the side. I know I used to do writing on the side too, because I never worked to live on what I made, pennies. But then when I finally stopped everything and concentrated, I was able to make a living. So I think it's great that a lot of people are rethinking, you only have one life, and people say, I'll do it when I retire, I'll do it, tomorrow. You got to do it now, you really have to find time. So many people say, oh, I don't have time, I have kids, I have grandkids. If you want to write, you'll write. You have to do it. Get off your duff and do it. Now this book is called the Worrywart's Prayer Book. And it, like the Layover, is a book of devotions. I published this with the publisher HCI, Health Communications. You may remember them. They used to do the chicken soup books. And they published that about 10 years ago. But I didn't care for the way it came out. The cover was yellow, and it just had the title on it. And the insides, the font wasn't nice, the spacing wasn't nice. It just was not nice. So after about 10 years, and after I did this cat book myself, I said, this independent stuff, you can do your own book. You don't have to. I've always been traditionally published, and all you do is hand over the manuscript and fight with the editor when she tries to change things. Okay. So I decided this is of all my children, this is my best, because a while ago I broke my wrist, and I got something called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, which is almost like shingles. Anything you touch feels like cut glass. And I was very despondent and depressed, and I thought I'd lose my job because I couldn't type. I thought I'd lose my new husband that I just got because I wasn't interested in anything. I was so full of pain. So I promised God if he would get me over this, that I would write this worrywart book, because, God's in charge, and worrying is silly. It's negating God. It's telling people, you don't believe in God, because God is in charge, and whatever happens is his will. Okay. So I wrote this book. I got better, and I kept my promise. So it's called the Worrywart's Prayer Book. And I decided to bring it out again with a nicer cover, bigger font. I'm using, I don't know if you can see it, but the font is nice. The paper is nice. I got to choose everything. And it was such a blessing and so nice to hold this book in my hand the way I wanted it to be. You know, that's what's great about self-publishing, is you are in control. Having been traditionally published all my life and having to fight with editors, not fight, but have little disagreements with editors about, you know, I want to use this word and they want to, and then you have an editor that keeps underlining things and saying idiom, idiom, idiom. So they don't like idioms in this one house that I work with. So that was another one I did on my my staycation. And then I did a book a while ago. Many of you who write children's books or know about children's books might know about this book. It's called What I Like About Me. Okay. And it's got like formatting things in, it's got hair and all these wonderful things. This book I did with Reader's Digest Children's Publishing, and it sold almost 1 million copies for them, not for me, because I was on staff there. So I got a paycheck, but I didn't get any royalties. If I had gotten royalties for this, I could be in the south of France now sipping a cocktail. But anyway, this book was translated into all kinds of different, I have 1 million of them over there, all kinds of different languages and stuff. So when I was on my COVID staycation, I said, you know what about, you know, this book, What I Like About Me, tells kids about self-esteem. If you have big ears, wiggle them because it'll make the girls giggle. If you have glasses, you're distinguished. It will make you be better at English, you know, and stuff like that. And so it just, after 13 years, I think, it just got on the Forbes 5 best books to show kids about self-esteem. So I thought, well, why don't I write one book about what I like about you? You know, so it's about the children. It's called What I Like About You, and it's got pictures in it instead of illustrations, because kids are so into you know, phones. Everything is in a photograph. So I used photographs, and I had a designer of mine do black line on the back, because you couldn't just have the kids. You have to have them in a location. So we did this book, and the book is about encouraging children to pick their friends, not about what they look like or where they come from, but how nice they are. And at the very end, and there's all different nationalities in here, and there's different abilities. There are some kids who are deaf, and there are some kids who are in wheelchairs, and there are some kids who are disabled in some way. And what I'm trying to do in this book is to get kids not to be so, you know, taking up with their parents. Oh, can't talk to them because they're from such and such a place or whatever. And at the end, there's an interactive 2 pages or 3 pages where the kid gets to say, my friend Cindy is, and then they check off, my friend Cindy is kind, funny, or whatever. And this book also, I give $1 of the sale of this book to the Catherine Violet Hubbard Animal Refuge. And that's the people in Sandy Hook. This is one of the mothers, and she's decided to do an animal sanctuary, and $1 from the sale of every book goes to that. So what else did I do? This book is also a devotional for kids, for tweens, I would say. And it's based on Philippians 4:8, wherein St. Paul says, whatever's good and kind and wonderful, think about those things. Don't think about, you know, villains and stuff like that. Now, this book I did a while ago for HarperCollins, Zondervan, but it's coming out in Spanish, which is totally cool. It's coming out in December and in next month in Spanish. So Now about writing. I've always written my whole life, but I never published. I used to write poetry. I used to write whenever anything got me upset or mad or sorrowful, I wrote about it. And I used to be a journalist before I became an author. And I wrote about something. A woman kept on saying to me, why aren't you married? Why aren't you married? You know, you should be married. So I wrote an article for the Hartford Courant called, what was it called? The Joy of Being Single. And in it, I wrote all these reasons why I love to be single. And that seemed to hit a note because it went on AP Wire and it went all over the place. And so I decided it might be good to be a book. I didn't know how it could be a book or whatever, but I wrote to Peter Workman of Workman Publishers. Okay, yes, Renis, I will get you later. She just sent me a message here and it was over my thing. So anyway, The Joy of Being Single, I sent it to Peter Workman without an agent. I just sent him a letter. That's another thing about writing. Take a chance, write it all down, send it to your paper, send it to your, clubs and anything, if you're like a person who is a runner, start a blog, you have to start, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I just meet so many people who say, oh, I could have written that. I said, yeah, but you didn't. I wrote it because so many people say they're going to do things, so they're going to write, and when they get time and everything, time is of the essence, carpe diem. You have to do it now. You have to do it now. In one of these questions was, what kind of example or experience can I give? Perseverance. That book, The Joy of Being Single, I sent it to Peter Workman, but I sent it to a bunch of people before I sent it to him. He took it with one letter, and it sold 500,000 copies, translated into 5 different languages. And he got Roz Chast to do the illustrations. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Roz Chast, but she's a New Yorker cartoonist. And like, I couldn't get her now, no way. But back then, it was 20 years ago. She did that. And she also did this book with me called The Joy of Being 50 Plus with illustrations. You either love her or you hate her, Roz Chast. But I was blessed that I was able to, they were able to get her. And so that's what I was doing. Perseverance. There's also a question here about what do you do when you hit a wall, when you have writer's block? Well, on this book, whatever, I just hit a wall. I've never hit a wall before, but I hit a wall then. And I was going to give them back the money, the advance, because I said, I can't do it anymore. I can't, 8 chapters on 8 different things, like what is pure, what is good, what is admirable, what is this, that, and the other. And I was going around in circles. There was just, so I said, you know what, I'm giving it back. I can't do it. My husband, my sainted husband, said to me, what you should do is get a bunch of manila folders and just write the title of the chapter on top and just write nonstop. I'm not a person that writes. I don't like to write nonstop. I like to finish what I'm writing and make it perfect before I go on. But that's a real horrible thing to do. And it wastes you time because you don't want to change that because it's so nice and it's so wonderful. You don't want to change it. But a lot of times you wind up throwing that away and starting all over again, or you find a different thread. So my advice is, well, let's get back to the folders. He said, just write everything down, just keep writing everything and don't care about whether it's spelled right or whatever. Just write everything and then put it away and go to the next thing. So get to that chapter. You've got something. It's not a blank page. You have something there. So I did that and it worked. It really worked because I wasn't I wasn't stuck. There was something there, a kernel of something that I could use. What are some of the other questions? When did I start writing? Well, I said I wrote my whole life. I started out with poetry, just writing things. And then I became newspaper journalist for the Advocate and the Hartford Courant and the New Haven Register. And I did a lot of features. And then, like I said, I used to write in funny things to the op-ed page. I still do, to the Norwalk Hour sometimes. But it's just a way of releasing, for me anyway. It's a way of, some people do yoga, some people do whatever. But when I write, it just clears everything. I'm looking at the video and I see to the left is the photo that Cindy made up for us. She took one of our books and put them in a gorgeous frame. And we are so blessed to have a library and a librarian like those people over there are fantastic.
Well, I have to give credit where credit is due. I have to give credit where credit is due. My team here worked on it. And Carol Popola was the one that came up with the idea. And she worked with Carrie Varga here at the library. And they're the ones that developed the frame itself. And Carrie did the graphics and Carol put them together. So it's thanks to my great team here.
It's wonderful. You see it? Do you see it up on the wall? There to the left. It's up on the wall. I was amazed when I opened the bag and I saw this. I was like, let out a gasp. I said, oh my goodness, that's fantastic.
Well, it's a good reason for all of the authors to either pick up their
right
swag bag or email me their mailing address, because we'll mail it to you if you can't get to the library.
Yeah,
Yes,
you definitely want it. They
some
definitely
cool
need to
thing.
get it, right, Aaliyah? They definitely need to get their swag bag.
Yes. Hey, Stuart, you got a cat there? Fantastic. My cats are sleeping. Oh, well, they were sleeping. They're gone now. So anyway, about writing, the perseverance is very, very important. And there's a question of becoming emotionally draining and stressful. I like to write humor because humor to me is great. It's fun, I mean, the most serious books I've written are the Worry What's Prayer book and the devotionals. But humor, I wrote a book, and then I'll be out of here because I'm taking too much time. I wrote a book called Laugh Out Loud with the Irma Bombach Writers Workshop. And I put it together with 30 or 40 other women. And we self-published it with the workshop, and it did very well. I'm thinking of doing another one with them. But that's about it, I guess. That's about it. I enjoyed listening to everyone. I have a question for the lady who did the children's book. Is she around? Or
Katie,
did
yeah.
she leave?
No, I'm here.
Okay. Katie, how many pages was that book?
It's a traditional 32-page picture book.
Oh, it was 32. Okay, I couldn't
Yeah.
tell. It seemed to be larger than, because I know picture books are 32 pages, but it seemed to be longer than that.
Yeah, I mean, the word
And
count
where
is on the high. Well, it's not really on the high side, but it is over 500 words. It's kind of a.
Okay.
But
No,
yeah.
it's just it seemed to be thick. I couldn't see from here. Also, I wanted to say, the illustrator was fantastic. Did you pick the illustrator yourself, or?
So originally this one was published by a publishing company. So they had an illustrator that they worked with that they selected for it. And then when I went to self-publish it, I just had to contact her.
Right.
And, we came to an agreement on payment and everything.
Right.
So I did not select her, but I was really happy with what she brought to the table. And I think that's one of the really special things about picture books and I think it makes you a better storyteller as a writer to think about what the illustrator can bring to the table. And that
definitely.
is a way to like help you reduce your word count too. And just, for a short story, when you were talking about setting, I mean, there's very little you need to do with setting in a lot of ways, unless it's super important to the story. You can let the illustrator fill that piece in of the puzzle for that.
That's very true. What you just said is very, very true. To bring your word count down. You don't, they can show rather than tell. They can illustrate. That's what they do. They illustrate so that you don't have to put every single word in there. I had an illustrator once tell me to take, he was going to do the illustrations that would show what the book is about, that I didn't have to be writing, the brown cat ran, I didn't have to do all of that. So that's it. Oh, there she is. Hello, Kalini Beanie. This is my cat, Colleen, Fiona, Shannon, Nolan. And all of those names are her because I couldn't make up my mind. So she's a rescue putty from Tails, not Paws, but Tails in Norwalk. So there was another question I had. I wanted to say to the man that wrote the
Arjun,
what was his name?
Arjun
Yes.
Shidduri.
Love the title. Love the title. That's another thing. Titles and covers are the most important thing. It's almost more important than what you have inside, because nobody is going to pick up your book if it doesn't have an interesting cover. The title is also very, very important. Now, his title, The Silver Cup, that to me, so what? But the boy who ate 30 sandwiches, I want to know about that. As soon as I saw that, I said, I want to find out what that's all about. And that's so important. You have to bring the reader in and make them want to open the book, and make them want to be interested in it. A lot of people who self-publish, they publish for themselves a lot. They don't keep their reader in mind. You can't use references that only because you lose them. You lose the people. There was a man who was doing a World War II book, and it sounded really interesting, but his title was something that only he knew. I had to ask him, what's this about? And he said, oh, this is such and such, and we used the term. I said, but that's not helping us. We want to know what the book is about. And I guess that's it, because I used up all my time, I think. Finally, I made it. I'm getting a new computer today. So the next time we have this, hopefully, I will be able to be on time and visible. So that's it for me.
Thank you.
I really want to I can't thank Cindy and her team enough. I cannot thank them enough. But I will be bringing donuts over to the library
thank
when
you.
I come. Then.
The staff will love it.
Yes. I was going to bring them some champagne, but they wouldn't be able to stack the books the way they're supposed to. So that's it for me.
So if anyone has any questions for any of the authors or any follow-up?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of a question to Katie, because I do believe I have a children's book in me. You're talking about picture books are 32 pages. Is there a specific word count?
If you're talking about like modern picture books, 500 is a really good, maybe about 5 years ago, there was a real push to be under 500. And it was like this real movement to have very few words in picture books. And traditional publishing has kind of come up from that a little bit. So around 500, and you can even go a little over that. But like the days of like the 1,000 or 1,200 word picture book, unless you're talking about a specific nonfiction project or something, that's just not really where the audience is at. So I'd say, 500, 600 words is a good, even for if you're thinking about self-publishing, that's kind of where the audience is. And that's where, a good read aloud, I think, fits. And I might really is not much more than, I don't remember the exact word count, but it's not much more than 500.
Okay.
But I think that's a good count to aim for.
And
for
we've
your-
asked some of the
Thank you.
some of the children's authors that couldn't be
I think.
in any of the panels, we've asked them if they could record reading of their children's books for us and to send it to us, and we would post it on our website and put it up.
I'd like to,
And I
Um,
just, sorry, go ahead.
I'd
No,
like to
I
ask
just wanted
Aaliyah,
to
how did
I
you
just
speak
wanted
of
to
your
add that- Whoops.
how did you speak of
I
your
just wanted to
sainted
add
husband and write a book about the joy of being single?
Pardon me?
You referred to your sainted husband. How'd you then write a book, The Joy of Being Single?
I was single when I met him. And this is a funny story. He thought he was off the hook because he said, I met this dame and she doesn't want to get married. I'm fine with that.
Well,
But
I have a question.
I had
A
to hide.
question. How does an indie author get into audiobooks? Any suggestions by anybody? That's a whole different audience that remains untapped.
Audiobooks. I did one audiobook with my angels in the Bible. It is a whole different audience, and I don't know that much about it. A lot of times when you do a book, if they think it's going to be, a bestseller or very, very popular, they do an audiobook with it. But I only have done one audiobook with a long book.
I mean, if you're working on your own independently without a publisher, is it easy, hard to get into the audio book? Who do you have to approach?
Would you be doing it yourself? In other words, would you be reading it yourself?
Maybe, I don't know. I used to be in the theater, so I'd give it a shot, but
Well, we had an author who was here at the library, and she used one of our quiet study rooms and used some library equipment that we have, and she recorded her book and then submitted it to a audio book company.
Yeah, that's good. There are companies that just do, like you said, audio books and all. I'm sure you can get all that info on the, would you stop? My cat is walking.
So Arjun, I had mentioned earlier that I went into a studio, and this idea just came to me out of the blue to do an audiobook of The Layover. And so I have a friend who is a classical pianist, and so I knew I wanted to partner with him. And then he was the one who recommended the recording studio that we went into. And so I got that already, and then now I'm trying to figure out how to package it and where I'm going to go. And so I'm seeking professional advice on the best medium. But you may want to take note of this for future reference, because the gentleman who I spoke to mentioned awesound.com. That's AWESOUND.com as a good place to go. That, according to him, is better than Amazon as far as the payout is concerned.
Arjun, I have a lot of acquaintances that have done audiobooks. There are, I can't remember the name of the platform, but it's not Amazon, it's not Audible. That you have to be very careful with that because of their crazy royalty structure. But there is another easy online platform. I can't remember the name of it. I was looking into it for some of my novels, and I'm sure you'll be able to find them if you just check. And they're very easy to use. You can narrate it yourself, or you can hire someone. You get to pick, people that you have a beautiful speaking voice. I think it'd be probably best for you to narrate it yourself. But definitely there are lots of simple platforms that authors use.
I say the sort of indie side, that's a, as opposed to Audible, which is Amazon, is Libro, LIBRO.com. That might be, I haven't done an audiobook, but I've done a little
Yes,
research on
I
it.
think that might be it.
Yeah.
There's another one too. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, there's a couple different options, but those,
Calibre, Calibre maybe.
yeah, there's a couple different ones. Those are the two big ones. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that.
So you said Libro, LIBRO.com.
Yeah.
And what is the second one, Carol?
Calibre. CALIBRE. I believe that's the name of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all for participating. And so I expect to see you all to pop in to pick up your swag bag and email me if you live too distant and you need me to mail it. The other thing I want to just say is that we're going to have one more Zoom session from 3 to 5 this afternoon. So the same link, and we'll keep it open. And we've got 5 more authors from 3 to 5. We'll see you all then, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Cindy.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Cindy, there's no session Sunday, are there?
No.
Thank you.
Okay. I once again want to welcome everyone back to the Indian Local Authors event here at the Norwalk Public Library. As we celebrate our Indian local authors in Connecticut, we're excited to have this opportunity to bring together our writing community and our readers for education, networking, workshops, and beyond. Fostering a community of local authorship and providing our patrons with access to exciting new literary voices is a huge part of why Indie Author Day, a national day we have participated in and expanded for our audiences here at the Norwalk Public Library, has been so successful. Throughout the years, the Norwalk Public Library offers an aggressive schedule of author events each month. We call it Author Speak, and authors meet virtually on Zoom and during normal times in the library and offer interesting talks about their books, their research, and their writing process. This tradition has a long history at the Norwalk Public Library. According to an article in the Army and Navy Register, March 20th, 1915, 106 years ago, Miss Dotha Stone Pinio, Norwalk Public Library's first librarian, and her assistant librarian, Miss Margaret Stevens Wilson, pioneered a library exhibit in a tremendously successful civic and industrial exposition held in the local armory. This display of stories was attached to a tiny booklet, a collection of volumes written or illustrated by Norwalk folk. It was entitled Our Own Authors. We strive to present our 2021 version in the booklet that we are handing out to the public and to all of our authors that we had put together. And as we talked about promoting your books, all of the authors listed, we have information about their books, where you can purchase their books, and if people need additional information, they can always email me, clahey@norwalkpl.org. So I'd like to begin, and our first author of the session is Elizabeth Chatsworth. Elizabeth is a British author and actor based in Connecticut. She loves to write of rogues, rebels, and renegades across time and space. Elizabeth is a Writers of the Future winner, a Golden Heart finalist, a Pitch Wars alumna, and a member of the SFWA. She's the author of The Brass Queen, which was just released this past January, an award-winning fantasy set in an alternative Victorian age. Then when she's not writing, Elizabeth works at the Westport Library and is also a voiceover actor. There's a rumor she possesses the world's best scone recipe. Contact her on the website to see if that's true. So she'll give you her website. But join me in welcoming Elizabeth Chatsworth.
Oh, hello. Thank you for the lovely introduction. It's such a delight to be here today with Norwalk Library and with all these wonderful local authors, many of whom I know and have met and are all absolutely terrific people. So it's a real joy to be here. So as was said, I'm Elizabeth Chatsworth. I'm a British author who's lived in Connecticut the last couple of years, well, couple of decades, actually. I'm older than I think I am. And on that note, I came to writing very late in life, well, late-ish. I was in my mid-40s, heading towards that big 5-0. And I was saying to my husband, well, I have these things in life that I haven't done yet. And he said, well, why don't you get on with them before you hit that big 5-0? So I started writing. That was about 7 years ago. Now, I've always been an avid reader. I love fantasy and science fiction and romance and comedy and all those things, but I had no idea how to actually start writing a book. So I actually signed up for an online writing course with David Farland called My Story Doctor. And he happens to be a New York Times bestselling sci-fi and fantasy author. And I started turning in assignments. So the moral of this story is it's never too late to start, and you never know where you may end up. You may actually end up speaking on an author panel like this. So it's never too late to actually begin that novel. So I'll tell you something about my journey towards publication, how the book actually became a bestseller to mine and probably everyone else's surprise, and also just give you some tips on how you might be able to start your own writing, or even how to enjoy different things in other folks' writing when you're actually reading a book. There are things you can look out for just to make the journey into someone else's world more interesting. So 7 years ago, no idea how to write a book, and signed up for this course. So the very first assignment was on world building. And I was very interested in steampunk, which is a genre of science fiction and fantasy writing, which is set in an alternate Victorian age. And actually, my husband and I love this particular genre. And there's a whole community who are devoted to it. So we have get-togethers, everyone dresses up in pseudo-Victorian gear, and we all talk about steampunk films, movies, books, and so on. And so my first world building exercise on this course was actually a steampunk world. So I had in mind my heroine, Constance Haltwhistle, and a fiery British aristocrat who meets this, let's just say, cowboy stroke spy American tourist, J.F. Truesdale, and all the adventures they get into in Victorian England, specifically in Sheffield, my hometown, because I didn't want to spend too much time doing a lot of research. So why not do it in my own home city? So that worked out quite well because it's a wonderful industrial town in the north, and it gave me a great backdrop upon which to lay the steampunk aesthetic. So I turned in my first assignment, this world building test, and David said, hey, this is great, you know, love the world, you should turn this into a novel. I'm like, well, that's good encouragement. So that's exactly what I did over the next year, which sounds like an awfully long time, but in terms of writing, that's not really too bad. So after a year, I had the very first draft of The Brass Queen, and I thought, yes, I'm done. I'm on my road to publication. Now what? Well, there was this thing called editing that I wasn't aware of, which is where you go through every line and make it better. And I thought, well, how many times do you have to do that? Well, this is about been rewritten, edited, and so on, probably 20 odd times, 4 times seriously with other people's input, like editors and agents and so on. So although I thought I was well on the way, I still had a long way to go. So one of the ways you can get published is to self-publish on Amazon and so forth. You can also go through a small press, or you can go through a larger press, or what we call a traditional press, where the publishers tend to give out maybe an advance, and you can actually get your books into bookstores and so on. So that's the route I decided to try and take. So I entered a contest called Pitch Wars, which is a great free contest for all writers, where you basically win a 3-month mentorship with 2 established writers, and they go through your first draft and say, oh boy, these are all the things you need to fix to make this saleable. So there were so many things to fix in my book here, but I entered, I got in, we rewrote it, and eventually I did get an agent and we went down that publishing route. Now, by this time, it's about 5 years later after I first started it. So certainly it's taken a long time to become this overnight success. And had I known at the beginning how much time and effort and heartache and triumphs and the whole roller coaster of emotions that goes along with writing and then eventually promoting your book, I might well have thought twice and taken up knitting instead, but I didn't. And overall, I'm pretty glad I kept on with it. I signed with an agent, went to all the publishers, and finally ended up signing with a publisher who promised me that they would do what I most wanted, which was an actual hard copy version and with a fantasy map in the front. And this is because I'm from the era when reading Tolkien and all those old fancy books, this is what they were like. They had the map and all that, and that's really what I wanted. So trust your vision. If you get if you are lucky enough to get multiple offers, go with what sings to you, whether it's right for the market or not. You know what you really want in your heart. So this January, I finally did get the book published, and to my delight, it actually got really great trade reviews, which is reviews from trade publications like Library Journal and Publishers Weekly and so on, which was great. And I think that was all down to all the folks who have helped me to edit it over the years, because certainly my first draft might have had an interesting world, but I certainly had a lot to learn about the craft. So I think one of the keys to the success of this particular story was that I was open to hearing everyone's input. I think you can certainly develop your own career and create a better work of art just by listening to people. Because the interesting things about books is that everybody has their own opinion on what the story is. I wrote this book and I think I know what it is, but everyone who reads it from their own perspective. And I get lots of emails from folks who basically are explaining my book to me and saying, oh, I love this bit. And it seems sometimes they've read a completely different book to the one I wrote, but that's part of the magic of it. Everybody is bringing their own viewpoints and perceptions to your work. So always be flattered that someone's taken the time to read your book. And always take on board their input, because it really is fascinating to hear everyone's opinion on something which in effect is so personal to you. As I say, I wrote this set in my hometown with characters who are near to my heart, and it's been a delight to share it with the world. And I'm so happy, because it's supposed to be a funny book, I'm so happy that it's managed to bring smiles to people's faces over the last year. And I think that's one of the things you can look for when you're reading anyone else's book. There are elements that you might find very funny, but perhaps the author didn't mean them to be funny, but they are anyway. And so if you ever interact with them, be honest, but don't be surprised if they are surprised by your reaction to it. Other things I have done since publishing The Brass Queen is signed to continue what is now going to be a series. So it's amazing from a small beginnings what you can actually get into. And I've also managed to win a writing contest called Writers of the Future. This book was just published this week, which is an anthology of sci-fi and fantasy, and a short story which is set in the same world as The Brass Queen is in there. And so now I'm meeting a whole bunch of new fans who are writing to me saying, hey, I love your story. And again, they're definitely sometimes reading a totally different story to the one I wrote. So I think that's been the biggest surprise of this whole journey, is how different we are, but how wonderful it is that we can all enjoy a lot of the same things and manage to share this wonderful creative journey together, because this is a two-way journey. It's the book you wrote and the book they read, and you meet together with your readers in the middle, and it's just magical, the interaction. And it's certainly made specifically the last 18 months where the world's been quite difficult. It's been a delight to meet so many new people on the journey and to share these crazy characters with them. So that's roughly my journey over the last 7 years. The plan is to continue writing the entire series and a whole trove of short stories set in the steampunk universe. But I also write other things as well. Everything tends to be humorous, a bit of adventure, a bit of romance, a bit of satire. And these are the things that I love to read in other people's work, and it's what really matters to me as well. So I hope if you are interested in those kinds of things, and specifically if you like a pseudo-Victorian satire, comedy adventure with that tugs on the heartstrings here and there, you might check out my website, which is elizabethchatsworth.com, and you can search out The Brass Queen and also the Writers of the Future anthology if you want an introduction to my work, or if you want an introduction to all these other wonderful writers who have short stories in this anthology. It's a great primer on some of the new visions that are arising in sci-fi and fantasy. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, but that's basically the last 7 years of my life in a nutshell. And I'm just encourage anyone who wants to start writing to give it a go, because you never know where you might end up. And if nothing else, if you just write your story and put it in a drawer, you will still have completed something that matters. It's art, you've created it, and whether anyone else ever gets to see it or not, you can be very proud of that. And I hope you never think that it's too late to give it a go, because it isn't. So get going. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll do the questions at the end. Our next author is Libby Waterford. Libby Waterford writes steamy contemporary romances where lust always leads to happily ever after. The president of the Connecticut chapter of Romance Writers of America, she's also an instructor at the Westport Writers Workshop, where she teaches classes on romance and genre fiction. Libby has participated in National Novel Writing Month every year since 2008 and is a 5-time winner. Libby lives with her family in Fairfield County, Connecticut. So please join me in welcoming Libby.
Hello, thank you, Cindy. And thanks for that wonderful talk, Elizabeth. It was very inspiring. Thank you. Yes, I live in Norwalk, Connecticut, and I am a contemporary romance author, and there's thunder rumbling outside my windows. Not sure if you can hear that, but it's very atmospheric. As Cindy said in my bio, I am the president of the Connecticut chapter of Romance Writers of America. And I also teach writing at the Westport Writers Workshop. I teach fiction, genre fiction, and other workshops there. And I mostly wanted today to tell you a little bit about the books I have out, and also just about how grateful I am that the Norwalk Library has this forum for local authors. It's so special. So I'll just show you quickly my my most recent series. I write contemporary romance, and this is my most recent series, the Never a Bride series. I have 4 books. Last year when we were doing this on Zoom still, I had the first 2 books in the series out, Can't Help Falling in Love and Can't Make You Love Me. It's a series about 4 reluctant bridesmaids at a Santa Barbara society wedding. Since then, I published the last 2 books in the series, so I'm done with this series. Can't Fight This Feeling came out in January or February, and this came out, the last book in the series, Can't Hurry Love, came out in June. And it was such a thrill after being out of the library for so many months, when coming back and going down to the fiction level and seeing my books on the shelf thanks to Cindy was such a thrill. It was such like a writer dream come true. So that was really special. And I'm working on a new series. I'm writing the first book now. It's going to be another contemporary series set in a small Connecticut seaside town. And I haven't quite announced it yet, so I'm not going to share too many details, but I am working on the first book now for NaNoWriMo. NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month, and it is a challenge every year that hundreds of thousands of people around the world participate in. They try to write a 50,000 word novel in 30 days. So I'm about halfway there with my word count. I'm just creeping up on 25,000 words, almost halfway through the month. So fingers crossed I can keep up my momentum and finish the challenge strong. If any of you have participated in NaNoWriMo, you'll know what a special time of year it is where all of these people are trying to accomplish the gargantuan task of writing a whole book in a month. And if you have never tried National Novel Writing Month, I really highly recommend it as a writing exercise and a writing challenge to see if you can do it. It's pretty fun. So yeah, I just really wanted to thank Cindy and the library. Being a writer is a very solitary endeavor most of the time. And when I moved to Norwalk from California 6 years ago, I had 2 little boys, a baby and a 3-year-old. And the first stop we made was the Norwalk Library to get our library cards, because I knew that that's where we would find a connection to the community. And I was not wrong. And they've grown up going to the library, and I myself have written thousands, tens of thousands of words within the walls of the library at the tables there. And I just think it's so lovely that the library supports its local authors and gives us this forum every year and throughout the year, doing author talks and things like that. So I think that's something worth celebrating, because writers are, we're all on different stages of our writing or publishing journey, but to connect with other authors is so special and so powerful. We are really lucky to have a robust writing community here in Fairfield County. There's so many authors, but we all support each other and help each other. And that is so positive, and it makes me feel so good to be a part of that community. So if you haven't taken advantage of that yet, I really recommend it, to reach out, make sure you know what writer groups there are and around your area, and just get that support, because it can be hard to keep going sometimes as a writer if you don't know any other writers. So when you can connect with other authors and celebrate each other's successes, commiserate over the rejections, it makes the journey a lot richer and a lot sweeter. So I just wanted to say thank you. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Libby.
Thank you.
Our next author is Sonia Huber. Sonia Huber is the author of 6 books, including the award-winning essay collection on chronic pain, Pain Woman, Take Your Keys, and other essays from a nervous system, and the forthcoming Supremely Tiny Acts, a memoir in a day. Her other books include Opa Nobody, Cover Me, a health insurance memoir, and the Backwards Research Guide for Writers. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Brevity, Creative Nonfiction, and other outlets. She teaches at Fairfield University and in the Fairfield Low Residency MFA program. So please join me in welcoming Sonia Huber.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. And thank you again, Cindy. It's really nice, even though we're much more on Zoom these days, to be able to get to see the faces of other writers. It's wonderful. So let's see, I teach at Fairfield U, and since the time that I sent in the bio, I actually have copies of my 6th book, Supremely Tiny Acts. So I do nonfiction almost exclusively, but and I use kind of the personal essay format. So it's myself as a main character, but often involving research in the world that I live in. So, and when I talk with my students about nonfiction that's research driven, I immediately see them like shut down because they're like, oh no, it's a term paper. So I thought I'd talk for a little bit today about how I use research to make lively and engaging nonfiction. And I think that's probably true. And I'd be excited to hear about the experience for fiction writers as well during the Q&A. So this newest book is about, it's about one day in my life. So it's called a one-day memoir. But the impetus for the book was just that I had a couple of years ago, I had actually gotten arrested in New York New York City in the fall of 2019 during a climate protest. Extinction Rebellion is a group that was trying to raise awareness about global warming. And so I just was sitting on the pavement around this bright green boat that people pulled into Times Square. So that was the beginning of the adventure. I do write a lot about activism, but also I'm a mom. And so I write about sort of the tensions between caring about things happening out there in the world, while at the same time just having to, remember to do stuff like remember to take my coffee off the roof of my car before I drive away and things like that. So there's always this tension. So the day that I wrote about in Supremely Tiny Acts, I had planned badly. So in the morning, I had to go down to court in New York to get rid of to get the charge dropped. And then in the afternoon, I had to go up to New Haven. I live in Stratford. I had to go up to New Haven because my son had his driver's permit test. So there was a lot of anxiety and, sort of adrenaline. And I actually did not plan to write about that day in my life. But I think like most writers, we're sort of always open to situations that might offer us a chance to engage. And I always think of writing my nonfiction projects like puzzles that I have to figure out. So I really love fiction that takes place in a single day. So classics like James Joyce's Ulysses or Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. And I recently had a piece up on LitHub that was a bunch of different different books that take place in the course of a day. So I knew that I wanted to try this in nonfiction, but part of the problem is that most of my days are really boring. And most of my days, there's just no way that I can keep track of everything, partly because it's so boring. So I was, unlike most days for the court day, I was on the train, I was on the subway, I was waiting in waiting rooms, and I was really keyed up. So those two things prompted me to start, oh my gosh, it's really storming. Those two things prompted me to start taking notes. And then I thought, oh, I could finally do this day. So the research that I had to do for this was partly after I had done the whole chronology of the day, what I remembered. I had to go through and kind of reconstruct the details. So I ended up throwing in all of my text messages that I'd sent to various friends. I was pecking out emails to my students during the day. I was grading papers as I was doing all this stuff. I was on Twitter, so that's another sort of stream of information. I had the list of my search browser history on my phone. So it's an interesting experiment in trying to see how much I could reconstruct of the tiny details of what happened during the day. So I like that kind of thing because it ended up being both a research challenge and a thought experiment. And then, so a few other books where I've used research. My first book was called Up on Nobody, and that was, I think, many people are probably drawn to writing. I know I was drawn to writing partially to set down and figure out family stories that I had received from older family members. And so my mom emigrated here from Germany by herself when she was a teenager. And she would always tell me stories about her dad, who was active in politics in Germany. And so she had told me that he was an anti-Nazi activist during and after the Second World War, which seemed like kind of a brave thing to be doing. And so, but then there was this tension because she was sort of resentful of him because he was always doing political stuff. And so she would say like, oh, he's a nobody, with a little bit of bitterness. So that was an interesting dilemma. And that was the first book, was doing a ton of research, interviewing people over in Germany, reading books in German, doing a lot of archival work in Germany and here to try and research not only the life of someone, but to understand the political context so that I could really understand what the tensions were in his life. And then I think, so two other books that I just want to mention. I did write a collection of essays on chronic pain called Pain Woman Takes Your Keys. And, that was sort of a fun, it's weird to describe an essay collection on chronic pain as a fun book to write, but it was kind of fun because I feel like my books are just getting weirder and weirder. Like each one kind of emboldens the next experiment. So I just decided for that book, I was like, I'm just going to be as weird as possible. And I'm not going to try and sort of present the suffering of chronic pain. I want to present sort of the weirdness. If you have chronic pain, you might be interested. Anyway, I did all kinds of research for that, some on treatment, but a lot on how the body interprets and copes with the chronic pain experience. But I also ended up doing research on a lot of topics that sort of were only tangentially related. And then I am just about done with an essay that my agent is going to try and sell very soon. And this is a project I've been working on since 2014, and it's actually about the socioeconomic divide here in Fairfield County. So, and we all live right in the middle of that. And we all know too that at one end there is the hedge fund wealth of Greenwich, and at the other end there are, there's poverty in Bridgeport. So I'm from the Midwest originally. When I moved here, I got very interested in the issue. And, I began to learn about everything from the history of this place from thousands of years ago up until trying to understand how hedge funds affect the international market and the well-being of us all. Every time I get done with a research book, I really vow like I'm never going to do that much research again. But at the time, I just sort of get interested. I really always try to write for a general reader. And in some ways, I think that not being an expert is a strength, because I don't have to understand something enough to get a PhD in it. I just have to understand it enough to try and explain it to myself in normal language. So that's sort of, I hope that book comes out within the next couple of years. And yeah, and then so that's basically what I do as a nonfiction writer. And I guess the last thing I'll say is people ask, I have a full-time job and I parent. And so people ask how I've managed to get so much writing done. And my secret has always been just writing an hour a day in the mornings. And what I try to do is just make that a habit in my life. But on any particular day, I don't expect anything of myself. So there's no word count to meet. There's no like, this has to be a good day. Like, I just feel like I accumulate a lot of pretty bad days all together, and I have to do a lot of editing and cleaning up. So yeah, I sort of approach writing by trying to set the bar as low as possible. So I look forward to hearing what everyone else has to say. And I also have a sale code for my book with the website. So I will paste that in the chat if you are interested. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Our next author is Janet Luongo. Janet Luongo writes and tells stories, gives webinars, workshops, and speeches, and loves being creative. In 2021, She Writes Press published her book, Rebellion 1967, a memoir, which has generated reviews and interviews in regional and national media, such as Hearst Newspapers, Authority Magazine, Elephant Journal, and on Instagram and podcasts such as Rebel Mouth Books, Reinvention Rebels, Just Relationships, and Uncut and Unplugged. Raised Unitarian Universalist in New York City, Janet earned a master's from Queens College at City University of New York and is certified in art education K through 12th grade. She taught art and exhibited her paintings in New York, Connecticut, and Switzerland. She worked as an art education curator in Bridgeport, Connecticut museums for 20 years. At Discovery Museum, her innovative programs connected urban and suburban children, and at the Housatonic, her programs developed leadership in underserved teens. She taught communications at Sacred Heart University and served as president of the New York City chapter of the National Speakers Association. She speaks on creative thinking for schools and colleges, museums and libraries, entrepreneurs and company conferences, women's retreats, and places of worship. So please join me in welcoming Janet Luongo.
Whoa, thank you. Finally got unmuted. Also, you have to change, please share the screen with me so I can share my screen. Thank you for coming, all of you. And I recognize some of my friends here, so I'm so glad for your support. And I have seen Betty Bono's, the first thing this morning at 9 o'clock, I liked your slideshow. So I hadn't prepared one, but I said, that looks really great. So I'm an artist, so I figured I would include pictures, and I'm very lucky that my publisher, She Writes Press, did include many artworks that I had created in the book and photographs as well. So I have some visuals and a few excerpts. So I'm going to kind of follow Betty's example. She talked mostly, I think, Betty, about your own story. So that's kind of what I have is mostly my story, but I'd like to also talk about writing and why I chose indie publishing rather than go the route of seeking the big publishing house. So
and you can share your screen. I've set you up as a co-host.
Okay,
so you can
great.
Share your screen.
So now I have my screen up, so I have to click on so I share screen. Okay. I'm just sharing. Can you see my screen now? Because I pressed share screen, but, oh, there it is. Okay. So that should be.
Okay, you need.
Okay, this.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to start. So first, Cindy, like everyone is saying, we so much appreciate how much you do for authors. So that's really wonderful, all the support you give. So I'm going to talk about 4 basic things today. What is my story? Why I wrote my story? Why I took over 50 years to finish it. So the first speaker today, that was nothing, 7 years. and why I chose indie publishing. So, okay. My story begins with, it's a coming of age story. So it begins when I was just 17 years old, and I was graduating high school, Jamaica High School, which is in Queens, New York City. And I was in advanced studies, honor student, and one of my, can you see this bar across here? I don't know if you can, oops, sorry. Can you see the faces, or is there a bar across?
No, we can see the faces.
Oh, okay. So that's me at the bottom. That's my graduation picture of high school. I was 16, 17 years old then. And on the top is my dear friend, Andrian, who was my friend then. She's gone on to become famous with as a writer, director, and producer of Cosmos. I bring her up just because I want to express the level of the people that I was studying with were really special. And I'm going to talk about another friend, Vera, who was one of my dear friends that year. My family, this is my family, 1965. And this is the last picture that we had of our family before the divorce they had the following year. And there you see my mom and dad. My mom was a fashion illustrator and art director. My dad was a New York City Police Department policeman, which freaked out a lot of the people I worked with in the Black community. I learned a lot about that conflict then. And on the bottom row is my younger sister, Maureen, middle sister, Barbara, and that's me at the end there. And I wanted to say something about my father here. He was very special, I think, ahead of his times with issues. It was very fraught in those years. The 1964 riot in Harlem was very scary, and he was called in from Queens on special duty. So he was actually at that riot, and he would come home and he would talk to us about it. We were worried about him, and he spoke about how scary it was to be there. But he also taught me some history about the Irish riot. We were Irish, the Duffys, right? He said there was during the civil rights, Civil War, there was a riot called the Draft Riot. And he said the violence there far surpassed the violence in Harlem. So he was very intellectual, interested in history and current events, and we always talked about it. And he followed Martin Luther King. That movement was in full swing at this time, and he saw the point. It was obvious. He knew from walking the beats in Jamaica and Bedford-Stuyvesant, some of the poorest neighborhoods in New York. He would see that people couldn't get jobs because there was job discrimination. They were set up there in that ghetto. We're learning more and more about the redlining. And the schools were dilapidated. So he saw why the children weren't getting the education and fulfilling their needs. They were not getting an equal chance. He saw that. So he saw Martin Luther King. He approved of that. He approved of the Great Society and training kids rather than putting them in jail and things like that. And beyond that, he was very aware of his own parents and how he developed his own views. His parents were, unfortunately, bigoted and prejudiced and racist, also very sweet. So it's really hard to, in my mind as a kid growing up, how could somebody be so loving and be so prejudiced at the same time, hateful? So none of the characters in my book, which are all real people, it's a memoir, are villains, and no one's an angel. Everybody is mixed, which makes them real, I think. So he knew his parents had poisoned him, he said. He said, they told me, that I was superior and other people weren't as good. And he said that did poison me. He admitted that it was in his heart. He had certain biases that he would react because of them. He didn't think he could eradicate it completely, but he was aware of it and he decided not to act on it to try to catch himself. And he also decided that he would not continue to pass that hatred on to his 3 girls. So I so applaud him. He had other problems, which were alcoholism. He could never conquer it, although he tried with AA. And he was addicted to that as his father was. So again, it's passing down things. But he and my mom were deeply in love, but they couldn't live together because of the alcoholism and other things. So a year after this, they did get divorced. And then my older sister at this point did leave home. So my mother immediately after the divorce, just as I was graduating high school, ready to go to college, my mother immediately remarried and immediately 2 months later divorced the second husband. And this involved a move to New Jersey out of New York, which endangered my going to the City College of New York. So I was really upset. And then she moved back to Jamaica, wanting to reconcile with my father. Now that had been such a mess for so many years of them fighting that I just said, you know, Mom, you know, I want to go to college. I want to study. I don't want to be involved with all this roller coaster anymore. So I said, if I'm 17 and ready to go to college, I can live on my own. So they agreed and they set me up in an apartment in the same building they lived in Jamaica with my younger sister, who's 16. So you have a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old living alone in New York City on our own, unsupervised. And basically there was not very much caring going on. So this is my sister Maureen, art like painting I made of her. Beautiful woman, smart. And she was just a kid then, 16. And we enjoyed being in our own apartment, but we also felt neglected. And my professor at college told me, is this even legal to have this kind of arrangement? But we stuck together very closely that year. So we had that arrangement, and I basically found comfort in the Black community. I wasn't getting any mentoring or any care from my parents. So I assisted a Black mural painter who lived nearby, and actually my parents knew, and I had been working with him for a year already. So I continued down there to work with him, and we painted old-fashioned pictures of aristocrats, actually, which I didn't like doing because I thought it contrasted with what was going on in the world. But he just loved people. He was very kind. He wanted to give a vision of kindness. We worked together for several months, well, a total of a year and a half. And I also worked before I get to that, yes. So I also worked with a man named Stan, who was a community activist for youth. And we tried to get funding for the Great Society. And there were young men who came there, mostly men, some young women. And we hung out and we were paying attention to the programs that we could get funded to help youth. And it was a wonderful commitment I made. And I got mentored there also. And I felt friendship, and I felt I was doing something purposeful. Let me go back to this one slide. So Stan would ask me, why do you come here? You know, white girl. He would sometimes be tough and funny, but he was curious. He was curious why I was coming. So this is an excerpt in the book. My mind floated to my childhood when I watched the movie Giant. During the scene when a white owner of a diner bullies an elder Mexican man with his family, I broke down crying. Why? All I know is that whenever I see someone hurt and abused like that, it feels like it's me being hurt and I have to do something. So there was an experience I had going into Harlem where I started to learn. We went up there. I went with a friend of mine from high school, Rudy, who was a young Black man. And we were friends, and we went with Unitarian Universalists to the Quaker house to tutor children. But that day, these children didn't want to be tutored. They wanted to go downtown. So we went, I said I would take them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So the Quaker in charge, Woody, he said, I told him that it's good for youth who are culturally deprived. Art is good for youth who are culturally deprived. So Woody squinted and said, culturally deprived? And in his gentle Quaker manner, he shared his view. These kids are steeped in culture, their own very rich community, their extended families and neighbors watch out for them, share traditional food, tell them stories, and expose them to many languages and dialects. Whoa, I felt hot with embarrassment. I didn't mean to put the kids down. Woody understood I was well-intentioned, like the so-called experts who produce such terms as culturally deprived. He said they couldn't see how the term assumes the dominant culture is superior. I had blindly absorbed the same false assumption. So I was learning a lot, and I also worked with the first Black neurosurgeon in America. His name is Dr. Matthews. We called him Doc. And he offered free clinics for the neighborhood, the poor and addicted there. And this young girl was clinging to her mother, and so she couldn't even talk. I couldn't even understand anything that she was saying. She didn't seem to even understand how to use the toilet. I was just totally shocked and so horrified. I wound up working with the doctor at his hospital. He found a position for me at one time that year. And I went to see one of my other friends from high school who had gone to Vassar. And she was living the dream that I had hoped to live. I was living still in Jamaica, where I had lived in high school. I had also hoped to go away, as she did, to a wonderful school to just study. That's what she was doing. And she reminded me that that had been my dream, to really concentrate on college. But my experience at college was tainted because there was anxiety about starting. And then when I got there, it was a 3-hour commute by subway. Every day, and it was kind of deadening. There was one time I got molested up in the park there. I wasn't happy, and I said something's got to change. Bill ran out of jobs to do, so I wasn't able to earn money with him doing the mural painting. Our parents had paid the rent. They paid for food, $1 a day for each of my sister and me. And then the rest was up to us, anything else we wanted. So I said, I'm just going to leave college for now and work. So that's what I did in January, the term there. This is now the year that I concentrate on mostly, 1967 in my memoir. I was very dissatisfied, kind of, mixed up this way, that way. I didn't know where to go. And so I left college to work at Barnes & Noble bookstore. I always loved books, like all of you here. And I also studied at the Art Students League of Manhattan, which I loved. And there I met a mixed race artist and musician. And he showed me the music nightlife of New York City, and we fell in love. This is an excerpt from that part. I imagined the beautiful dark girl before me, a Polynesian islander, her golden skin and features the legacy of mixed heritages. A kinky black braid snaked down her back to tickle the tender triangle above her buttocks. To match the rich colors of her skin, I merged coils of paint on my palette, from yellow ochre golds to burnt sienna and Van Dyck brown, and brushed them into the body's form sketched on my canvas. Her weight fell solidly on one foot. hips gracefully tilted while her shoulders sloped in the opposite direction. A perfect S curve, someone said behind me, a youthful voice, not my teacher. I turned to see a young man smiling at me. He wore a wool hat with interesting designs and colors, which I'd noticed many times from a distance. He and I were among the few people our age around the Art Students League. So this young man, his name was Carmen, and he had been on this march also. Martin Luther King led a march in April for peace and justice. He saw the two movements merging, and I did too. I kind of think that way, that things are connected. And I had heard him speak at the Riverside Church too, which the speech just resounded in my soul. He had moved me from the beginning when I Have a Dream speech. I was only 14. I wanted to fly to Washington, D.C. to be there. I wished I had the time traveling that you were talking about before. I wanted to be there. I've always felt very attached to his movement for peace and justice and nonviolence. And yet there was violence all around. And in the next month, in Memorial Day, I was with Carmen in the East Village and Tompkins Square Park. I don't know if any of you know that park. It's a beautiful park. And that area was very diverse then. We had Ukrainians, and there were Puerto Ricans, and there were Jews, and there were Christians, and there were students, and very big hippies. Hippies were starting to come in, but mostly they came in after this. This event here made the East Village famous, unfortunately. But people were picnicking on the lawn in Tompkins Square, and then suddenly we see police paddy wagons, and we see riot gear, and police came in, and they were arresting people, pulling them off the lawn. As you see here, this young woman being held by her face is being held there. And so it was a terrible thing. We didn't understand what happened, and we all marched down a long way, miles, down to the so-called tombs where they were being held. So I protested there, and my picture was taken in Newsday. And my parents saw the picture, and they objected, especially my father, because, and I understand this now, he was a policeman, and I was protesting excessive force, and also with a Black boyfriend. Now, he had been open-minded, as I said, but that was too much for him. I had crossed over a limit. He was angry. And you know what? I was angry too. So I was afraid of him, that because he was angry, and I left home. I ran away with the musicians, and we had trouble because we were both only 18. We didn't know where we were going. We had no plan, and there were some nights I didn't know where I'd lay my head. I was lost. I felt lonely, away from my parents, my sisters. I felt broken and sad, and I was kind of falling apart and wanting to get back home. It was not a happy time. We had jobs, but I realized how hard it was to get a job when you had no money. You need shoes, you need bus fare. If you don't have any money, you can't even do those things. So through these terrible things that were happening, I was also learning a lot about the world and about myself. And the so-called summer of love, which wasn't really like that for me, 1967, we were in the East Village, living in a pad, very, very hot. That's where all the heat goes in Manhattan. No trees, so there's nothing to mitigate the heat. And I did get a job on Madison Avenue. I felt like I was living two lives. But there I started to get heartbroken because Carmen, living the nightlife, kind of got stuck in drugs, which is unfortunate. And it left me mostly alone. So at one, I had times of danger and harassment. And there was one final event, a break-in, and I had to escape down a fire escape to get to work and to get out. And that was the end for me. I knew that I was going to stay there anymore. I was going to get out of it. So I had my I came to an understanding of why I had been so impulsive, but this was not working for me. So I finally did go to my father and ask him to help me so that I could go finish my education, move up to the Upper West Side and go back to City College. So that's my story that I wrote. Now you might wonder, why would you reveal a story like that? Because it's very, very personal. Certainly a lot of it's not very flattering to me, making foolish decisions and things like that, getting in trouble. But who wants to really read about people all doing perfect things, right? I mean, we talked about boring before. We don't want boring. But it happened, and I thought it was a good story. I thought it was a good story. I had been journaling for a long time, while everything was happening. So I had a record. You talked about doing research. I resonated a lot with what the previous, what Sonia said before, about researching, about being an eyewitness to things. So it was a turbulent story, but I felt it needed to be told. The young girl I was then wanted me to tell it. And right after the events 1980, that was 67. So 12, 13 years later, I did write down a draft. But I put that away under the bed because when my son got born, and I had no time, and I didn't want to be thinking about that when I was nursing him and raising him. So when he finally grew up and moved away, I said, well, he's old enough. If I put this in the world, he's just going to have to understand. So that was partly why it took me a long time. And I got really serious about it 10 years ago when I joined a writer's group. I would highly recommend that to anybody who wants to write a book. A writer's group was great because you show up with your 4 pages. We read them out loud. My first group was the Write Yourself Free with Patrick McCord. And I thought he was brilliant, and he helped me structure the whole book. And it's kind of like scenes. He loved movies and things like that. So after 1 year, I had another really solid draft. But like others were saying, then what do? You have to write it again, and again and again and again. And so it took me 9 years to do the editing and the proofing, etc. So the book is I wrote it. Why did I go through all that? Well, it was for myself, as other people were saying, for discovering and understanding, putting on the page what happened, having to reconstruct and do some research and to reimagine. It was always the same emotional truth. Everything I put down there was the truth as I remembered it. But I would think about, well, what would I have seen? And so I filled it out a little bit with true things that happened at the time that I had forgotten about, but they were always in the background. I had 3 levels: my own coming of age as an individual, there was my family, and then there was the society, all of us kind of interacting. And who is this book for? It's for me, for that reason of self-discovery, but it's also, I wrote the book for people who are now trying to figure out what to do about racism. And I think it's something that we're asked to do now as white people. White people are asked to kind of look at ourselves and what we have, what kind of biases we have. And that's what my father was doing and what I was doing when the Quaker House, assuming that they were culturally deprived. Well, what does that mean? I had read a good book from a scholar, but really think about it. Well, that meant that we believe our culture was superior. So it's just uncovering it. It's not about self-flagellation. It's not confession. It's nothing I feel guilty about, especially not if I'm understanding it and realizing it was wrong and then changing. So that's nothing to be ashamed of. The other group I want to write this book for to reach is people who go through adversity and face obstacles of any kind, especially young girls. And so many young people think that if they're in trouble or going through trouble, that it will always be like that. They don't have the vision, the experience to see that it will end. They don't know how much strength they have to get over it. So I'd like it to be encouraging that as bad as things can get that you can pull yourself out and recover. So why did I choose indie publishers? Well, I heard of this wonderful press from the second editor I had was Carol Danhauser from the Fairfield County Writers Studio. That she was excellent. She helped fill in a lot of the emotion. She did a good editing job on me. And I couldn't afford her to do the whole book, but she got me started knowing what to look for, and then I continued to edit. And she writes press. I wanted to sign up because by the time I was finished with this, you have to remember, I was 70 years old. So the idea of going for an agent, which could take a week, a whole year, right? It could take a year to get an agent. An agent could take a year or two to get a publisher. And then, you know, so I just said, I don't have time. And I'm probably, the chances of actually getting an agent anyway, I thought were slim. So I said, let me go to check this out. They are kind of a hybrid because they don't just print what you give them, which is fine too. They do vet, and they take about 15%, I think, of the manuscripts. So I felt there was some vetting. They are getting awards. Their book covers are getting awards. They're getting more people to take their book seriously. So I did sign up with them, and I really love the idea that it's a community. And Brooke Warner, who founded it, is just lovely. She has a TED Talk you might look up about this book she wrote, Greenlighting Your Own Book, do it. And she's expanding to be more diverse in her authors. And I just really enjoy it. You do need a publicist, I believe if you go to a publishing house or if you do the indie way, I believe you still have to do your own publicity. So it seemed to me that wasn't a big benefit for a big house anyway, because it used to be like that. They'd send you on a book tour, but now the author really pays for a lot of that. So it does have, She Writes Press does have distribution. It has the typical distribution, the traditional distribution, Ingram services that the big publishing houses use. So I've got into all of them, the Barnes and Noble, local bookstores, Walmart and Amazon and Kindle and Apple and Google. So it's on every platform. And so they are very, very good, very organized. I think they did a really good cover for me, and I'm happy with them. So if you feel like you're ready to reveal your heart, write a memoir, but they have to be really honest and they have to be deep, and no one's a hero, let alone yourself. So I wish you all the best with that. And if you have questions, we'll have that a little later. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Janet. And the last author of our indie author events today is Richard Seltzer. Richard Seltzer lives in Milford, Connecticut, where he writes fiction full-time. Richard worked for DEC, the mini computer company, as a writer and internet evangelist. He graduated from Yale with a major in English, went to Yale grad school in comparative literature, and earned a master's in comparative literature from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. While at Yale, Richard had creative writing courses with Robert Penn Warren and Joseph Heller. All Things That Matter Press recently published 5 of his novels: Parallel Lives, Beyond the Fourth Door, Nevermind, Breeze, and Shakespeare's Twin Sister. They also have another book of Richard's under contract, Together Tales, to be published in the future. Richard has written over 20 books, including The Name of Hero, which is a historical novel, Ethiopia Through Russian Eyes, translation from Russian, The Lizard of Oz, satiric fantasy, and Now Then and Other Tales from Ohm, children's stories, in addition to pioneering books about internet business. So please join me in welcoming Richard Seltzer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cindy, for including me in this, which from having sat in on earlier panels, just listening and everything, I get a strong sense of community and of tying together. And I see that especially looking at the group who's gathered here. several of whom are part of a reading group that I've been going to for the last few years, run by Gabby Coatsworth. I mean, Elizabeth's from there, Libby's from there, Betty Bono is from there. I discovered my publisher by going to that group. Betty was published by All Things That Matter Press. I contacted them, and they're the ones who published these 5 novels of mine, and we'll be publishing another one soon. So there's a lot to be gained from that. Gabby's here in the audience, and I hope she'll put in the chat about her session. She does once a month a gathering with an open mic. You get to read your stuff, and then the day after, a whole bunch of us gather at her rendezvous, she calls it, and talk about the trade and what it's like trying to write and trying to market. So if Gabby could just put into the chat the URL or whatever for a website where you can then get the details and sign up and take part of that would be good. I'd like to talk a little bit about the most recently published book, which is Shakespeare's Twin Sister. I love the title. And I want to talk about how I wrote a book with such a strange title, and then read a chapter from it, and then say a few words about writing and the whole process. The one last word about the community stuff. I'm not a native of this neighborhood. I've only been in the area for a little more than 3 years, and arrived knowing just about nobody. So having a writings group to connect with was very important. And also I had arrived at a stage of my life when I had no responsibilities other than to write and to read. So I've been able to, so basically I've written 7 books over the last 3 years, and 5 of them have been published. So anyway, let me move on with how I wrote Shakespeare's Twin Sister. Virginia Woolf imagined a sister of William Shakespeare who was as talented as he was, but didn't have an opportunity to get an education, much less to write plays, just because she was a woman. I was intrigued by the idea, not just of a sister, but of a twin sister who, with disguise, could act as his double so that they could share the work. So I immersed myself in his plays, rereading all of them twice and reading biographies of Shakespeare and histories of his time. The known facts of Shakespeare's life are few. You could summarize them in a paragraph, leaving lots of wiggle room for the imagination. The anomalies are intriguing. Will, at the age of 18, married a 26-year-old woman who gave birth 6 months later. A few years after that, she had twins, and almost immediately, Will skipped town. His whereabouts were unknown until he appeared in London 7 years later. An outsider with a negligible education, he soon became a full-time actor and playwright in the highly competitive London stage. He would rehearse one play in the morning, perform another in the afternoon, typically 6 different plays a week, and yet he somehow found the time to write new plays at a torrid pace, some of the finest plays ever written. As my book began to take shape, I imagined a scenario by which twins could be separated at birth. The twins would not know about the origins of their births, nor would their parents. In my story, Will's twin sister, Kate, was raised by a wealthy cousin who thought he was her father. He had her pose as a boy so she could get an education. When the twins met at school, they were drawn to one another. Without knowing their relationship, they had an inexplicable love-hate connection. Later in life, Kate relished the freedom and independence of being a boy. As a teenager in Paris, she attended university and dueled to the death with the captain of the King's Musketeers. Kate and Will met again as young adults and discovered the secret of their birth and of their mutual attraction. They're pulled apart when Will was tricked into marriage with Anne Hathaway, and then reunited when he realized that not just the first child, but Anne's twins as well, were not his. They ran off together and spent Shakespeare's lost years in Italy at university and in street theater before tackling the London stage, which is brand new and chaotic like Hollywood in the 1920s. I was surprised and readers will be, as one scene flowed naturally from another. It was a complete book. It worked. Then I realized that I wasn't done. I couldn't expect readers today to suddenly immerse themselves in the world of Elizabethan England. I needed a bridge from here to there. I needed a frame. So I imagined that Kate woke up in the body of a 99-year-old woman in a nursing home in 1987. She had no idea how it happened. Though she was disoriented, she had a hell of a story to tell. And I had met such a woman nearly 50 years before in a nursing home in Penticton, British Columbia. She was an impoverished Russian princess in exile, the sister of a historical figure I was writing a novel about. The historical figure had been an officer of the Tsar's Lifeguard Regiment in St. Petersburg, an explorer in Ethiopia, a cavalry officer fighting in Manchuria. He then became a monk and moved to Mount Athos in Greece. There he got caught up in a heresy dispute that led to Russian troops besieging his monastery and exiling 880 monks to Siberia for practicing the Jesus prayer, which you may remember from Salinger's Franny and Zoe. The man I was writing about was murdered in 1919 after the Russian Revolution. His sister was alive and active in 1987. Though her hands were too arthritic to unwrap a piece of candy, she could play Chopin on the piano flawlessly by heart. She also painted watercolors, remembered landscapes of the Dalmatian coast where she had fled right after the revolution. Having interviewed this feisty and unforgettable woman for 30 hours of the course of 3 days, it was easy for me to imagine someone similar, another princess on welfare who somehow had the soul of Kate Shakespeare and wanted to tell her tale. So I want to give you just a sample of this rather wild book of mine. This is the prologue, which is entitled The Princess on Welfare. It's set on January 15th, 1987. It was Thursday, the best day of the week, Kathy's day to play therapist. Her pace was light and brisk as she maneuvered through the winding corridors, past elderly in wheelchairs and others with walkers, and those strong enough to walk gripping the railing to keep their balance. One old lady in particular, the oldest of the old, caught Kathy's eye and raised her spirits. Letty, short for Letitia, meaning happiness or joy, was 99 years young. She was one of Kathy's patients, the one who, above all the rest, made her feel her work had meaning. Letty refused to use either wheelchair or walker, despite severe arthritic pain in all her joints. She held onto the rail with both hands and shuffled along, steady and determined, not that she had anywhere to go. Twice a day, she ventured forth into the corridors for the exercise in hopes of living another day and then another and another to discover what continued life might bring of experience and memory, to squeeze the last drop from the still moist cloth of life. She wasn't done yet. She would keep going. It was her duty, her God-given chore, and she wouldn't let up, regardless of the pain of movement. Fuck the pain, she would say in Russian, which even after 40 years in America was still the language she thought in, her English being an awkward translation of her native thoughts. Her name was Mrs. McNamee, but she didn't have a drop of Irish blood. McNamee was her married name. To Kathy, who never knew her mother, much less a grandmother, Letty was like a great-grandmother. Kathy was fascinated by Letty as an example of how long and varied a life could be. Moment. Letty Orlov had been her birth name. Her grandfather, a nephew of one of Catherine the Great's lovers, rose to the rank of general and was made a prince by Alexander II. Hence Letty, only child, inherited the title of princess. She was a princess by marriage as well. At 18, her parents married her to a general who was both wealthy and well-connected. He was a widower 20 years older than she, with half a dozen children from his first marriage, the oldest of whom was older than she was. He was a hereditary prince of Georgia, a cousin of the lady of waiting to Tsarina Alexandra, and Letty should have been proud to have been chosen by such an important man. When he died 8 years later in the Battle of Tannenberg at the beginning of World War I, she moved to Petersburg, to his family estate in Sochi on the Caucasian Riviera, near the beach on the Black Sea. She was 26, independently wealthy, and as long as she remained unmarried, she was free to do as she pleased. It pleased her to swim, to read, and to paint watercolors of the countryside. After the October Revolution, when a Red Army was approaching, she fled by boat to Istanbul and then to Dubrovnik on the Adriatic coast of Yugoslavia. Having left her fortune behind, she taught French at a secondary school, and in her free time painted one landscape watercolor after another until 23 years later, at the age of 53, she met and married Sean McNamee, an American of Irish descent. Sean was 10 years younger than Letty. He spoke no Russian. She spoke no English. When they needed words, they used French, but they didn't need words very often. They understood one another at a glance. A sailor, he had jumped ship in Dubrovnik, charmed by the beauty of the place and by the beauty of the older woman he saw painting watercolors on the beach. He found work repairing cars. They were married 3 months later. Then 3 months after that, he was shot as a spy by invading Italian troops. He was no spy. The fact that he was American made him suspect. When the war ended, that false charge in her marriage certificate enabled her to get a visa to America. Even though she was only married to Sean for 3 months and had only known him for 6, she went by his name for the rest of her life. Instead of Princess Orlov or Princess Bubnov, she was known as Mrs. McNamee. And 46 years later, her eyes still sparkled when she heard that name, a reminder of the man who had been the love of her life. Kathy knew that much from Letty's roommate, a distant cousin of hers, 10 years younger than her, a mere 89, the path of whose life was equally haphazard and intriguing, but who had no title and no talents. Even at 99, Letty continued to paint largely scenes of the Adriatic coast from memory, and she could play much of Chopin on the piano from memory with accuracy and feeling, despite arthritis that was so severe that she could hardly unwrap a piece of candy. Her fingers remembered the music and became young again once they touched the keyboard. Regardless of her talents and her exotic past, Letty was special. She could look at you in a way that said she cared about you in every word you said, even the words and phrases that she didn't understand, having never fully mastered English. Seeing Letty in the hall, her frailty, her feisty determination, Kathy wanted to do something special for her, to honor her as she deserved to be honored. For months, she'd considered calling the Transcript, the local newspaper, to ask them to send a reporter to interview the princess on welfare. Now she dared not procrastinate any longer, for Letty, despite her grit and guts, couldn't have much longer to live. Bill Green was the reporter she wanted. She had read several articles with his byline. She had asked a friend who worked at the paper and found out that he was a grad student in English who was taking a break to decide on a topic for his dissertation. That reminded her of herself with a master's in psychology and mulling what she might focus on for a doctorate. And she had to admit to herself the photo they published next to Bill's byline was also a factor in her choice. He reminded her of a young Robert Redford. She reached for the phone to call the paper, but it rang before she could pick up the receiver. It was Maggie, who filled in for Kathy's caregiver duties on Thursdays. "Come quick," Maggie said. "Letty's room. Something's wrong, very wrong. I can't explain on the phone. You'll have to see it to believe it." Anyway, enough of that. That's from there on, it's the story that she recounts and that gets pieced together about what had happened about the twin. I wanted to share a few brief notes, having looked at that list of questions. First, about why I write. I started writing fiction in the 2nd grade, 68 years ago. My first story was modeled on Kipling's Just So stories. I called it How the Parakeet Got Purple Cheeks. By the 3rd grade, I craved an audience and started reading my stories for show and tell. A few years later in junior high, when my parents encouraged me to become a doctor because doctors save lives, I replied that we all die. Doctors just postpone that. What matters is to have a reason for living. I wanted to become an author because authors can help people realize what they can and should do with their lives. Another little tidbit. Stories are born, not made. Some characters and plots come to life and grow and change. Others remain static. For an author, the experience of bringing a character to life is similar to becoming fluent in a foreign language. When you immerse yourself in a language, you can reach a point when you start to dream in it. And when you develop your characters to a critical point, you can start to dream what they say and what they do. You hear their words and see their action, and the story takes on a life of its own. And a third and last point about that, when I create characters and scenes, I'm performing thought experiments. If I put these characters together under these circumstances, what is likely to happen, and why and how does that affect my notions of human nature and destiny? That's why I write and enjoy writing, regardless of whether I have an audience. Then just a few aphorisms about reading, writing, and rewriting. The first draft is the cocoon in which the real story matures. The need to write fiction is an incurable disease you're born with. I write to find out what I think and believe. Create characters, not ideas. Thinking about your book is the real work. Putting it on paper is easy. Write to discover what you didn't know you knew. In rewrite mode, anomalies are opportunities, adding layers to the narrative. Sometimes a book happens to you, like you're pregnant with it. Good writers piggyback on the attitudes, beliefs, and concerns of the day. They presume their audiences live in that same world. Great writers create worlds they write about, telling enough so others in different times and cultures can fully imagine them. The aim of logic is clarity. The aim of the language is nuance, ambiguity, suggestiveness. Logic seeks meaning that doesn't change over time. Language lives, grows, changes. I savor the interplay of logic and language. To write something new or to significantly rewrite, I need to find a generative phrase, a line that implies a whole character, a whole life, a line that leads to another line and another, and that generates a rhythm that carries the story forward. Sometimes a good line is a hazard. You can like a line so much that you keep it, even though it wrecks the flow of the lines around it and of the story as a whole. The story is the vessel into which I pour my blood and guts, making exterior what's interior, so I can look at it and try to make sense of it. In writing, what is most private and personal is what connects us most with others, for that is what we most have in common. Definition of poetry: when words explode in your mind and that feels good. Our self-knowledge and our knowledge of others is limited. Every memoir we write is fictitious in ways we do not fathom. It's more honest to call what we write fiction and to shape the story the way its internal logic demands. Once your characters come alive, you are always writing, no matter where you are and no matter what else you might think that you're doing at the same time. Publication does not equal success. You have to enjoy writing for its own sake. 500,000 people run in marathons in the US each year. Only a couple dozen win. They simply enjoy doing it. Editing your own novel is like cutting your own hair. Everything's backward in the mirror of your mind. It can be done, but it takes practice and patience. Rereading Shakespeare is like playing a piece of music. The player grows as you learn it until you can watch it in your mind without looking at the words, like you can play the music without looking at the score, and then can hear the music without playing it. And finally, did you come to an end? Did you come to a dead end? Relax, go for a walk, take a nap, meditate, clear your mind. Then if you're lucky and your characters come alive and begin to talk, then humbly and joyfully take dictation. Later you can edit and rewrite and smooth. That's enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. So now I would like everyone to unmute, and then if you have questions for each other, just things you want to bring up or discuss, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I mean, it was wonderful to see everyone's different approach, from writing sci-fi and fantasy to memoirs to romance and everything in between. I mean, what a talented group of writers we have here. So it's great to have such a different the range of genres and approaches and everything. So thanks all for sharing.
I wanted to ask a quick question. I thought this panel was really interesting. I'm sorry I dropped out for a while. The storm knocked out our internet for a few minutes, so I lost part of the presentation. I was like, oh, I thought this panel was really interesting because of the variety of writing, types of writing. We have steampunk, and we have fiction, and we have nonfiction memoir, and we have research, and Libby is writing romance. And I mean, I thought it was just like wild because you're all connected as writers, as authors. But you know, I'm very interested in what brought you to your genre. I'd like to ask Libby, just because, you know, it was nice to share a table with you at the library. And
it was lovely.
And I have not read your books, but I got your first book. And because you are president of the Connecticut Romance Writers of America, what brought you to romance writing? And I know that romance writing, on the one hand, is an incredibly popular form of writing. It's incredibly popular with readers. There are all kinds of subgenres I'm beginning to learn about. But what attracted you as a writer to that form of storytelling?
That's a great question, Betty. And it was really interesting to hear the range of all the different genres we had on the call today. Very fascinating. I think I've always been attracted to the happy ending. I like it when my stories are tied up in a neat bow, and that is a hallmark of the romance genre. It's not technically a romance novel if it doesn't have a happy ever after for the main characters. So I like that. Some people want an ambiguous ending. I'm not one of those people. So that's why I'm attracted to the genre. I actually read historical romance as my first love as a reader. So some of you might be familiar with the series Bridgerton on Netflix. I was reading that series when it came out in the late 90s in high school and thinking, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. I'm in love with these stories. I'm in love with these characters. And actually that series made me think about, it was one of the first, I would say, modern romances, like how romance has changed a lot in the past 20 years. That was that series was at the forefront of that change, kind of evolving from the bodice rippers that we think of from like the 70s. So I thought to myself, I could write a historical romance. And I got about 3 pages in and realized, absolutely not. I don't know anything about the time period except what I've read in other romance novels. So that endeavor was short-lived, and I swiftly changed my subgenre to contemporary, which, while it does still require some research, at least I don't feel like I'm tripping over myself with all the different, word choice and was this word in use in that time period,
Exactly.
et cetera. So,
exactly.
So that's how I came to it.
Does anyone else want to talk about how you got into your genre? I mean, Elizabeth, you talked a little bit about this in your presentation about how you did an assignment on steampunk, and like there you were home.
And Elizabeth combines a lot of genres in her book, I would say, too.
Yes, I do. Steampunk, which is an alternate version of the Victorian age, usually with fantasy or sci-fi elements. Think Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, that kind of thing, is really an aesthetic that's layered over other types of stories. So you could have a steampunk murder mystery or romance or adventure or comedy. So it's strictly an aesthetic in that sense, which means any of you could go out and write a steampunk tomorrow, no matter which fictional background you're used to. You can apply that aesthetic. Speaking of Connecticut RWA, which Libby leads, it's just a wonderful group of writers, and one of the first writers groups I joined after Gabby's wonderful writing groups, which everybody here I think knows and loves. RWA supports all genres. There are folks there who write romance and crime and mysteries and all sorts of things, male and female, and it's a very supportive atmosphere. So I highly recommend that local writing group as well if folks are looking for connection other than through the online groups and the library groups and so on, which are also wonderful in this area. As someone said, that this area in Connecticut is just blessed with such a strong writers community. It's just wonderful to be a part of it.
Thanks for that plug, Elizabeth. I put our website in the chat if anybody wants to check out and see when we have meetings. You're free to join. They're on Zoom right now, so you can also email me if you have any questions about that.
I mean, I can share as far as my choice of nonfiction. I actually wrote both poetry and fiction when I was younger, and I still play around with both of those genres too. I was always stealing my mom's Irma Bombeck in the 70s.
Yeah.
And
wonderful.
My favorite.
I just I love her humor. I love the way she talked directly to readers and like told her own story. So I didn't actually know about creative nonfiction until I was like 30. And so I was working as a journalist. So I think the combination of literary writing and journalism led me to nonfiction.
A little different in that I don't pay much attention to genre. My stories are kind of told to me by my characters, and they become what they become. And I often, when I begin, have no idea how it will end. So I don't have in mind any kind of genre or pattern. It just sort of grows. I enjoy writing them as much as I would enjoy reading books of the same kind.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, I'm sure you noticed you're in a distinct minority here today. Could you comment at all about the place of men in today's literary world? And also, is there such a thing as writing for one sex or the other, or writing for both sexes?
Yeah, the word appropriation is one that I really hate. It's sort of an attitude, that you have to be some kind of person to write about that kind of person. One of my novels, Breeze, is written from the perspective of a 20-year-old woman. I think that's part of the adventure of writing, is putting yourself in somebody else's skin and seeing what you learn and seeing to what degree you can take on that perspective. That's wonderful. I don't feel like I'm part of any kind of literary world, so I really don't react to what is the current PC thing to do or what one is supposed to do. I simply write the books that I want to write. I have that luxury. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment with 4,000 books, and I have no responsibilities. I can write what I want. I can read what I want. I don't worry about selling the books. I mean, the publisher does a good job of it, and I much rather spend my time writing the next book than spending all of my time trying to market the one I just finished. In fact, the next one is the one that's clearest in my mind, and it'd be very hard for me to try to sell the book I did before while this new book is taking shape in my mind. But above all, the whole act of writing is part of an act of faith, that we have this something in common. And that I think one of those little aphorisms I said it reasonably well, that when we get deepest, when we get most personal, that's when we touch the most people, because we all have that element in common. And being able to imagine yourself as a young woman or as a person in very different circumstances or whatever, that's part of the whole thing. That's part of how we enjoy reading books by many different people about many different things. We can put ourselves in those shoes, and that's the fun of it. That's why I do it. I hope
Yes,
that helps.
I've written memoir, the I voice, but I'm writing now. The second book is fiction. So to your point, Richard, yes, it loosens up my imagination and my mind can wander, and I feel a bit more liberated in a sense. But it's a different feeling. The memoir was very, very personal, and as you're saying, that's what connects you to people when you're personal. So they both have value.
Janet, I wanted to ask you, did you consider including the wonderful artwork that was in the slides today? Did you consider putting that in the memoir?
Well, most of those that I showed are in the memoir. I was really glad that they did include them.
Okay.
Most of them,
All right. Well,
yeah.
I'm getting so old and forgetful. I read your memoir. It's wonderful. And
But I guess the pictures didn't affect you then.
no, I love the artwork, but it somehow comes across much more clearly to me anyway in the slides you did today. But it's both wonderful.
Thank you.
Work
Thank
and
you.
the
I know
writing.
you wrote a memoir yourself, or you are writing. You wanted to write about the race issue as well. So how is that going?
Right. Yeah. No, I've actually finished. And I'm, I may get tired of it, but I'm, going the long route and seeing if I can find an agent. But in the meantime, I'm writing blog posts with the title White Girl Mistakes.
Mhm.
So that's on my Facebook page. So looking back on, what my assumptions were about race when I crossed the color line in 1968 in Chicago, and how wrong I was in so many ways.
Mhm. Interesting.
Thanks.
Great. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments that people would like to share? Well, I applaud all of our authors for the past 2 days. I admire their hard work, creative talent, and tenacity. I hope everyone has enjoyed the sessions offered during the past 2 days. And hopefully everyone will read the books discussed if you haven't already. And of course, once again, if you want to know where to purchase them or how to contact the authors, you can email me, clahey, CLAHEY @norwalkpl.org. I thank everyone for sharing their stories, and I look forward to hosting Author Speak events throughout the year. And for our Indie Author 2022, next fall, hopefully we'll be in person. And I want to remind our authors that we do have swag bags for them, and people that can pop in to the library can pick one up, and people that are more distant, if you email me your mailing address, we'll send it to you. But thank you all. This has been a great 2 days.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming
Very
today.
helpful.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And thank you all for your kind words about the library and what we do here. It's really important.
Amazing. Yeah. Bye.
Cindy, take the rest of the week off.
Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.